Arc Worlds Publishing presents Guild of Tokens by John Auerbach. Read by Tavia Gilbert. Prologue. Wait 3 days between quests. The first quest was simple. I went to Chelsea Market during lunch, bought a handful of blueberries, a tillandsia, an apple popsicle, and 3 pounds of 90-10 ground beef. I left the goods in the windowsill of a brownstone on West 9th Street and then headed to Central Park, where the requester had taped a plain white envelope under a random bench. Inside was a wooden token, the size of a $50, with the number 1 intricately carved in the middle. I quickly hid it in one of my desk drawers, then proceeded to get absolutely no work done for the rest of the day. The second quest was slightly more taxing. I waited the required 3 days before checking the quest board again. There didn't seem to be any enforcement mechanism of the waiting time, but not wanting to upset anyone, I did as instructed. When I logged onto the quest board, the screen flooded with fresh quests waiting to be undertaken. I soon found myself perched over the Hudson River, trying to fish out 5 small stones without falling in the disgusting brown water. My footing was sure, so I didn't have to explain to my coworkers why I smelled like rotten garbage. The stones I placed in a brown leather pouch, which I left next to a fire hydrant in Chinatown. This time I had to fetch my reward out of an unlocked mailbox up in the Bronx. I secreted away the token in the bottom of an old pair of shoes so that my nosy roommate wouldn't find it, and began the countdown again. The third quest was another straightforward one. The headline was misleading. A promise to visit a quirky, forgotten shop, but when the full instructions arrived in my inbox, I sulked. A quick trip into Grand Central was all it took to find the cheap plastic bracelet, which I deposited in a garbage can on track 18. This time, the token was close by, stuck between the pages of an issue of Nintendo Power. The fourth quest was nostalgic. I again gathered up another weird menagerie of items and went back to the brownstone on West 9th Street. The items from the first quest were gone, save for the popsicle stick, and I hoped that whoever had fetched them had gotten there before the popsicle had turned into a pile of mush. Or maybe they wanted the mush, who knows? Another envelope awaited me when I returned to the same Central Park bench. Later, I pulled out the first token and set it aside the new one. The craftsmanship was undeniable. Maybe at some point I would get to meet their creator. The fifth quest was the most challenging by far. The instructions were multi-tiered and required precise timing. First, I had to board the last car of a downtown 6 train at 51st Street at 9:47 a.m. I then had to exit the train at 33rd Street and re-enter the third car of that same train. Needless to say, I drew a multitude of stares when I burst through the closing doors of the third car. Second, I needed to exit the train at 14th Street and board a crosstown bus going west, standing in the middle of the bus without holding a handrail. Third, I had to exit the bus at 7th Avenue through the front door and take the first available taxi all the way down to Battery Park. These steps needed to be completed in no more than 47 minutes door to door. I arrived at Battery Park with minutes to spare, only to realize that the original instructions had stopped after this step. Dejected, I almost left to go home, but a small, intricately painted arrow on a sign caught the corner of my eye. I walked in the direction of the arrow, only to find another arrow on a second sign. That arrow led to several more. I lost count after the 11th one, as I zigzagged across the park. The final arrow pointed me to a set of stairs leading down underground. At the bottom was an imposing wooden door sporting a large iron knocker. I hesitated slightly before banging the knocker 3 times. Nothing happened. I waited. Still nothing. After several minutes of contemplating the exact number of knocks needed, a small portion of the door slid aside to reveal a pair of piercing, golden eyes. "You're late." The voice was raspy and deep-toned. "I'm sorry?" "Tokens, please." The quest made no mention of bringing my tokens with me, but on a hunch I had collected them from their various hiding places. I drew them out, and a small, sooty hand reached through the slot and grabbed them from me. Before I could say anything, the slot closed suddenly with a thud. I stared at the door. Was this all some kind of stupid trick by a crazy person with too much time on their hands? Before my anger could get the best of me, the slot opened again and the hand reached out to give me something small and round. Another token, I realized. But it was iron, not wood. The same number 1 was in the middle, etched elegantly into the metal. I grabbed the token greedily, and before I could say anything, the man's hand withdrew back into the door and the slot closed again. Tucking the token away into my jacket, I danced happily up the stairs and into the mid-morning sun. When I logged onto the quest board again 3 days later, a new section had appeared. Epic Quests, it said. Requires 185 gold tokens. 1. In which I discover the world of questing. We traveled across the ocean in search of a new beginning. What we found was something entirely different. Rita Fawn Ash, January 1st, 1777. I didn't click the link at first. You wouldn't have blamed me if I'd ignored it. The email looked spammy. Every word was misspelled, the sender's name sounded Eastern European, and it ended with an exhortation to click here. I'd left the office just after midnight, after an exhausting 48-hour sprint cleaning up code that my jerk of a coworker Russ dumped on my lap so he could take a 4-day weekend. The perils of being the only female programmer at a startup, I guess. And a pushover. Well, I'd show him, I thought. I'd do such an amazing job that it would force my boss, who was so used to Russ's crap code, to marvel at my elegant functions. Or more likely, he'd compliment Russ for taking time to rejuvenate himself so he could come back to work refreshed and ready to kick butt. Or he'd pat Russ on the back for giving someone like me the chance to do some important work. Maybe both. Anyway, I was flipping through my work email on the cab ride home when I saw it. Epic Quests for You, the subject said. Probably one of those MMORPG ripoffs, I thought, but I opened it anyway, only so I could relegate the sender to the spam bin forever. With that accomplished, I drifted off as the cab sped down the FDR. 3 weeks later, it showed up again. Unsurprisingly, Russ had taken all the credit for my hard work and then announced that he'd accepted a new job at our biggest rival in Silicon Valley. I worked through his goodbye party, documenting all of Russ's code from the 3 pages of handwritten chicken scratch he had given me, so we wouldn't be flying blind once Russ the Great departed. Epic Questers Wanted, this one said. Well, at least their spelling improved this time. I opened it and read on. Adventurous individuals needed. Complete quests for treasure and glory. Click here. In college, when no one was looking, I became obsessed with Warriors of Olympus, an online role-playing game where you fought for your chosen Greek god or goddess, completing quests, killing legendary monsters, collecting loot, that sort of thing. I fought for love. That is, the goddess of love, Aphrodite. It was exhausting. Not just because of the late nights I spent holed up in my room building my standing in the Aphrodite Guild, but also because I had to take great pains to make sure I never ever said anything about this nerdy passion to my friends, who wouldn't be caught in the same state with such a game. I read the email over again for some clue as to why this mysterious game was worthy of my virtual blood, sweat, and tears, and my real time, money, and sanity, but no such clue was forthcoming. Off to the mines of Moria with you then, foul email. It was another 3 months before the final email arrived. We were now in perpetual crunch mode, working around the clock 7 days a week to ship a game months behind schedule that was lacking 60% of the features we promised in our Kickstarter campaign. But no worries, because all of our backers had gotten their t-shirts and posters and other crap that we had wasted 20% of our funds on. Money that could have been used to pay me, as I was now doing both my job and Russ's job, or to buy snacks for the office. Really, I would have settled for supermarket brand bottled water. I had fallen asleep at my desk, the keys of my mechanical keyboard pressed into my face, when the ping of a new email roused me from my coma. It was 3:43 on a Sunday morning. "This is your final chance, Jen." Great, now they know my name. "This is not a game. The quests are real, the rewards are real, the glory is real. Do you have what it takes?" These jerks were relentless. They must only follow up with the people who opened the earlier emails. Clever bastards. Well, now they finally had my attention. I clicked the link. My screens went dark. So did the ones to my left, the ones to my right, and all the ones in the row in front of me. If anyone else had been in the office, they would be losing their minds right now. Of course it was the girl who clicked on the ransomware email, they would say. Of course it was the girl who willingly pushed millions of lines of code into an encrypted lockbox that would cost the rest of the company's cash to retrieve because she was so tired one night and got distracted by an email. An email, of all things. I stared at my screens, waiting in the pitch-black room for something to happen. Anything. But the gentle whirring of the computer fans had gone silent, leaving me utterly alone. It was then that the quests appeared. The blinking cursor materialized first on my screen. Then rows of random characters whizzed by as they moved up the black screen and out of sight. Finally, a set of letters formed. It looked like the beginning of one of those old-school text-adventure games, before actual computer graphics, where everything had to be made out of ASCII characters. It said, "Welcome to the quest board, new quester. There are 3 rules. 1. Wait 3 days between quests. 2. Finish what you start. 3. Always quest alone. May the light of adventure guide you. Happy questing, the Council." I blinked and the message was gone, and in its place was a prompt. "Enter your handle." I paused to think of something appropriate. In my Warriors of Olympus days, I was Jade Phoenix 42. I rose quickly through the ranks, and pretty soon was running the whole shebang. Then, one day, a new player came along and turned the whole guild against me, got me kicked out, and tried to get me banned from the game for good measure. After that, I retired the handle and stopped gaming altogether. But that was 7 years ago, and maybe it was time to bring back the Phoenix. I hit enter, and then a list with 10 numbered entries formed. I read the first one. 1. Wanted, a Metro card receipt from the West 4th Street station. Not your own. Leave on the top step. Reward, 1 wood. Then the next. 2. Please give me some red leaves from Prospect Park. Reward, 8 wood. Then the next. 3. A Polaroid shot of the Raging Bull statue. Tape it on the construction wall at 1571 2nd Avenue at exactly 5:32 p.m. tomorrow. Reward, 1 iron. Then, finally, 4. Hi, could you be a dear and fetch me a handful of blueberries, a tillandsia, an orange popsicle, and 3 pounds of 80/20 ground beef from Chelsea Market? Leave in the windowsill of 194 West 9th Street. Thanks. Reward, 1 wood. I moved the cursor down until I reached the bottom of the list, where further instructions awaited. Select your quest or press A for the next page, B to submit your own, C for Q mail, or escape to quit. That MetroCard receipt quest seemed easy, so I went to hit 1, but before I could, it blinked out of existence and everything moved up 1 slot. The old number 2 seemed stupid and the new number 2 too precise, so I quickly hit 3 and pressed enter, as I wanted to go to the market anyway to get some vegan sushi. The quest list faded except for my selection, and a new message appeared. Remember your quest. Skyla Rose 101 is counting on you, Jade Phoenix 42. With that exhortation, the quest board dissolved and I was left alone again in the dark. But only for a moment. In another blink, all the screens were back on, and my stupid company wasn't going to kill me after all. I put a reminder in my phone for tomorrow's trip. Quest, to Chelsea Market, grabbed my bag and headed home, a new skip in my step, ready to grind my way to the top of whatever this crazy thing was. I was Jade Phoenix 42, reborn again. 2. Girls Who Quest. The natives called this island Mannahatta, the Island of Many Hills. A more appropriate name would have been the Island of Many Secrets. The dragon bowed before my might, the sword an extension of myself. I moved it with the fluidity of a dancer, the swiftness of a hummingbird, and the strength of an ox. The sword tore into the dragon's flesh, yellow blood bursting out, drenching the stone floor of the castle tower. The blood-stained weapon fell from my hands, and it clanged against the cold stones. I felt my knees go weak as I too fell to the ground. When I opened my eyes, the rat was dead and the blood-smeared shovel next to it. I didn't want to look at what I had wrought in the alleyway, the carnage I had unleashed for the sake of a few tokens. No, I wanted to leave the shovel and the dead rat and retreat back upstairs to the comfort of my railroad apartment. But I knew I couldn't. It would be a waste. I regretted taking the quest immediately. Kill a rat with a shovel, it said. Reward, 3 wood tokens, but make sure you bring the rat to Washington Square Park within 15 minutes after you kill it, or I don't want it. The first time I read it, it seemed like a win-win. There was a rat that lived in the alleyway next to my building, and there was a shovel that the super usually left in the lobby. I would throw some leftovers into the alley, lure the rat out into the open, and then smash its stupid head open, ridding me of the anxiety that surfaced every time I heard that clash of claws on concrete, and earning me some tokens in the process. Then I accepted the quest, and everything changed. I suddenly remembered that I went running the other way when I saw so much as an ant, and had the athletic skills and coordination of a manatee to boot. There was no way I was going to stare down a disgusting rat and kill it with a shovel and carry it to Washington Square Park within 15 minutes. Maybe Duncan could do it. I mean, that's what boyfriends are for, right? But he was in Hong Kong, again, raising money for his boss's newest fund, as he had been for much of our relationship. We met at work, actually. He and one of the fund's senior partners had come to the office 2 years ago to meet the engineering team as the initial part of their due diligence. There were only 3 engineers on the team then, me, Russ, and Andrew, who earned a PhD in comp sci from Caltech at 21. What he was doing at our rinky-dink startup, I still wasn't sure. Duncan and the senior partner impressed upon us that they made a point of investing in diverse companies, and I was going to say that 1 white girl and 9 white dudes hardly constituted diversity, but thought better of it and kept my mouth shut. As they made their rounds between the 3 rows of desks, Duncan kept turning his head back at me when he thought I wasn't looking. I proceeded to look away so that our eyes wouldn't meet, then eventually ran off to the bathroom to avoid further interaction. When I emerged 30 minutes later, Duncan was gone. He had, however, left his business card under my keyboard, with a short note scrawled at the bottom. Going to be a pass, sorry, but ditching Brett to grab a drink tonight at Rigby's if you're not inclined to pass on me. Wink. As far as pickup lines went, it was pretty terrible. But I hadn't had a date in months, and we were just out of another crunch period, so I wasn't surprised later when my feet carried me west on that rainy evening to Chelsea instead of east to the subway. The bar was packed when I arrived, and by the time I weaved my way through the thronging masses to Duncan, there was a drink waiting in front of the empty stool next to him. "Macallan 12. Neat," he said, gesturing to the drink. I locked eyes with him, and then at the drink, before picking it up and swirling the brown liquid around counterclockwise. "Trying to see if I poisoned you?" I stopped the glass, the scotch cresting against the side and spilling slightly over the breech. No, just pondering why I am here in this bar, contemplating a sip of a scotch that I absolutely hate with you, who seemed more interested in doing due diligence on what's underneath my sweater. Honestly, did you spend your entire time at RPG Lab staring at me? I put the glass down and slid it toward the bar, waving over the bartender. "Lefroy 25 on the rocks, and put it on his tab, please." The bartender obliged, and a few moments later I sipped my new cold scotch. "You know," said Duncan with a grin, "it's rude to drink without cheersing first." I stared at him, debating whether to chew him out again or to go along with the banter. I chose the latter. You're right. How rude of me. What should we toast to? Duncan thought for a minute before he raised his glass towards mine. To not missing out on a promising investment, he said. Our glasses clinked and I took a sip. The whiskey burned my throat as it went down, enough to make me forget for a second Duncan's second lame attempt at a pickup line. I began to reply, and that was when a cab drove right through a huge puddle behind me, the resulting wake drenching me from head to toe. I was still outside the bar. Duncan inside, our conversation within the confines of my head. I had not actually gone in, but had stopped to look through the window of the bar, trying to work up the courage to walk in and make the bold entrance that had just played out in my mind. Duncan turned toward the window, and I darted out of his view. Whatever courage remained had been washed away by the dirty rainwater wave, and so I retreated. The next day, I was in the middle of debugging the new inventory APIs when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I swiveled to see Duncan, who had grabbed a chair and was sitting directly behind me. I yelped. What are you doing here? I stammered out. Don't you know it's rude to sneak up on someone? Duncan chuckled. And don't you know it's rude to stand someone up? I had to cook up a really good explanation for my boss as to why I couldn't take the early flight out this morning. I stood up and stared down at Duncan, trying to gain control by talking down to him, as so many men had done to me. It doesn't count as standing someone up if the invitation was unsolicited and not accepted. You're the one who chose to wait there, not knowing if I was going to come, which I couldn't, because I was here last night until 12:30, making up the work I could have been doing if we didn't have to spend 3 days getting a build ready for you and Brett. For all the good that did anyway, seeing as how you're more interested in me than my code. I cringed at that last line, not only because it made me sound like a 16-year-old, but also because my boss would be furious if he found out I told off a potential investor. There was a silence between us for only a few moments, but it dragged on for what seemed like ages. Then Duncan got up from his chair and we stood, facing each other eye to eye. You're right. I shouldn't have presumed anything, and it was wrong of me to come back here after you clearly weren't interested in me. His eyes shifted from mine to the floor and then back again. I considered him again during this moment of vulnerability. He was cute, in a used-to-be dorky in high school, but then became an investment banker sort of way. His dirty blonde hair was an unkempt mess, and I didn't really like the sweater vest/button-down combo he was rocking, but he had done what a lot of guys would never do, admit that he had made a mistake. I decided to relieve him of some of his guilt. Well, I said, you weren't completely wrong. Our actual first date did not go down like I had imagined it. He insisted on buying me a proper dinner, and we ended up closing the place down. Then, the next day, in what would be an annoying pattern that still persisted to this day, Duncan left town. He did come back, but never for more than a week or two at a time. He even convinced his boss to throw in a bit of money in the end. And so our relationship had proceeded at a glacial pace, despite it being a year and a half that we'd officially been together. So he was not there when I, eventually, decided to confront the dragon. I took the leftovers from my fridge, grabbed the shovel from the lobby, and then waited in the alley for the beast to appear. It did, and my first attempts were not pretty. The rat was quicker than I expected. It ignored the food, and the super shovel was too heavy, so that every time I swung, the little bastard just scurried away. I discarded my coat for added mobility, leaving me in the alley with nothing but a ratty old t-shirt, but the increased speed was not enough. Eventually, I just chucked the shovel blindly, hoping that the vermin wouldn't expect a flying projectile attack, but the shovel just skirted harmlessly across the pavement. This quest was going to get the best of me, it seemed. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted. As I did, though, the locket around my neck fell free from my t-shirt. It had been my mother's, and she had given it to me for my 11th birthday as my sole present. At the time, I thought it was a pretty terrible gift, but now she was gone, and I just had the locket. That's when it hit me. You couldn't just give the dragon some crappy food and expect it to turn away so you could stab it in the back. No, it wanted something valuable, something special. And suddenly I realized what I had to do. I unclasped the locket from around my neck and held it in my hands. It was silver, the size of a dollar coin, and the clasp had long since rusted over. I don't remember if I opened it at the time my mother gave it to me, and if I had, its contents were now lost in my memory, along with the rest of my childhood. The rat's squeak interrupted my reminiscing, and I refocused on the task at hand. It was now or never. I skipped the locket down the alley like a stone on a lake. The sound it made bouncing against the pavement made me cringe. Was this even worth it? My opponent didn't care about my moral crisis, and finally emerged from the shadows. It studied the locket for a few seconds before deciding that it was more appetizing than the actual food offering I had made earlier, and sunk its teeth into the silver. With cat-like stealth, I crept along the alley walls to my discarded shovel, grabbed it in stride, and with one last lunge, brought the head down into the rodent's flesh. It was over. But not really. The rat corpse needed transporting, and there was the matter of retrieving my locket from the jaws of the dead creature. So I did what any normal 27-year-old woman did on a Tuesday night. I stuck my hand in a rat's mouth and pulled. 3. Kansas City Shuffle. We bought the island for the equivalent of 60 guilders, an absolute bargain. There was not enough silver polish in the world to remove the rat essence from my mother's locket, and after the 14th time I had buffed every arc and curve, I contemplated shutting it away in a drawer with the 3 stupid tokens it had earned me. But I couldn't, and back it went around my neck. One day soon, I hoped not to remember in crystal clear detail what I had gone through to get it back, but that day had not yet come. The momentary burst of courage I felt when I faced down the rat hadn't taken root, and so I was skittish in my selection of the next few quests, staying within the safe parameters of fetching tchotchkes from random stores around town. It was boring, and I knew it, but I couldn't bring myself to venture outside of my questing comfort zone. Besides, what was the point of this whole exercise? I was still half convinced that this was an elaborate marketing campaign for some new game, maybe even my own company's. And if so, I probably wouldn't even have cared. Any game that spent this much on advertising was probably going to be something incredible. Or a PR nightmare. Woman sues gaming company after catching rabies from rat. But I was growing tired of the fetch quests for random junk. And I was tired of watching my stack of wooden and iron tokens grow taller bit by bit with absolutely no idea of what to do with them. Fortunately, good things come to those who wait, because one night when I went to check the quests, there was a new section. D. Quester Profile. I hit D and a new screen appeared. Quester. Jade Phoenix 42. Quests completed, 11. Tokens earned, 23 wood, 2 iron. Level, 1. Token experience, 27. Level up, 30. Now we're talking. If there's one thing that will get someone to keep playing a game, it's the sense of making progress. It doesn't matter if it's steps on an endless, meaningless ladder. People will continue to climb even after their fingers are numb and their wallets are empty. It's one of the directives we received from the higher-ups at work. Keep the fish coming back for more. And now they had a hook in me, too. As much as I wanted to think that I was immune to such tactics, in truth, it activated the same dopamine trigger in my brain like everyone else. Show me that I'm 3 experience away from the next level, and I'll play all night to get there. I clicked from the profile screen to the quest list to look for something that would get me there in one hit, either a 3 wood for 3 experience, or a 2 iron for 4. I scrolled through several pages, looking for the perfect quest that would elevate me. Finally, on the 5th page, I found one that stood apart from all the others. Testing out a new shell game in Times Square. If you win, or even if you don't, I'll give you 2 iron. Come by the northwest corner of 47th and Broadway tomorrow at 2 p.m. I clicked quickly to accept. 2 iron for losing at an obvious con game was a no-brainer, and I didn't want anyone to grab it first. Plus, I would actually get to meet a fellow quester in the flesh. 11 quests in, and I still hadn't made contact with the people whose quests I had completed, or requesters, as I had dubbed them. My standard operating procedure was to have the token sent to the front desk of my office building, which was 70 stories tall, and afforded me anonymity from potentially crazy requesters. I had to sweet-talk the security guy to be on the lookout for envelopes addressed to Jade Phoenix 42. It took a bunch of cups of coffee, plus some borderline flirting, but he finally agreed. I'm sure he thought the whole thing was a poor attempt at covering up a pot delivery, but thankfully he never opened any of the envelopes. And after all, this was Manhattan, the land where people hired other people to do every menial task they couldn't be bothered with. Now, I know the quest said that win or lose, I would still get the 2 iron, but that didn't stop me from looking up all ways to win the shell game, or its cousin, 3-card Monty. You could just refuse to play the game, knowing that you were going to be cheated, but that didn't seem appropriate. You could delusionally convince yourself that you could follow the correct shell all the way to the end, but somewhere along the way you would miss the trick and lose everything. Or you could just trust your fate to the goddess of chance and guess a shell at random. That seemed to be the best option at the end of the day. I sat at my desk all morning, watching the minutes tick by, until it was 1:30, and I darted out to the subway. When I got to the Times Square station, I bounded up the stairs and into the madness of thousands of people looking up at giant billboards while walking very slowly. Finally, I arrived at the designated corner, which was empty. I looked at my watch and then at my phone to make sure I wasn't late. I wasn't. In fact, it was precisely 2 on the dot. I pulled out my phone again, trying to access the quest board to see if I had misread the quest, when I suddenly felt something sharp push into my back. I turned and looked down, half expecting to see a bloody knife sticking out of me, but it was just a cardboard box. A sharp box at that, but still only a box. Phew. I stepped back as the box was lowered to the ground by its owner, who I could now see was a young girl who couldn't have been more than 12. "Oh, hey, sorry about that. Are you Jade?" the girl asked cheerfully. She was on the shorter side, with blonde hair done up in pigtails, big gold hoops in her ears, and a denim knapsack on her back. Yeah, that's me. And you are?" "I'm Polly." The girl stuck out her hand, which I reluctantly took, and she gave me a vigorous handshake. "Of course you are," I said. "Aren't you a little young to be trying to scam people out here? I was expecting someone who looked a little more like your typical grifter. You know, worn face, missing teeth, poorly made leather jacket." She frowned and let go of my hand. "I'm not so young. I'll be 11 next week." Okay, sorry I asked. And happy birthday, I guess. So are you going to show me this trick of yours, or what? I need to head back to work soon." Polly bent down to push the box toward the Starbucks near the corner, and I walked with her as she positioned it just so. Yes, have a little patience, lady. I need a few minutes to set up." Polly plopped down her backpack on the box and began rummaging inside. I tried to look away to avoid the passing judgment of the Starbucks patrons filtering in and out of the store, but no one seemed to pay any attention to us. "So, Polly, you been questing long?" The girl looked up at me as if I was her grandma asking how to use an iPhone. "Whatever gave you the idea that I was that desperate?" "Well, because you're posting quests on the board?" "Right, exactly. I'm paying you, not the other way around. If one day we ran out of money, then I guess I would have to start from the bottom like you. But if that ever happens, shoot me. Can you imagine me, a Janssen, questing? Ridiculous." Okay, then. Obviously, what I thought was a simple question was actually laced with insulting underpinnings. This girl's family was evidently a big deal in the questing social circle, but what that circle even was, I had no clue, and was a tiny bit scared to ask more. I didn't get the chance, though, as Polly had finished setting up, and on the cardboard box were 3 identical shells painted in bright pink. In front of them was a little blue ball that I guessed fit under the shells. "All right, Jade, time to play. Now, I'm not sure if I got all the kinks out, so that's why I'm giving you 2 iron even if you lose, which you probably will, just going to warn you." "I know, don't worry about my ego. So how do I play?" Polly smiled. "Easy. I'm going to put the ball under one of these shells, like so." She covered the ball with the leftmost shell. "Then I'll shuffle all the shells around." Her hands deftly swapped the leftmost and rightmost shells, then further swapped the rightmost shell, which had the ball, with the middle shell. "And now you guess under which shell the ball is hiding. This first one's easy, so you should get it, if you're not a total idiot." "Thanks for the vote of confidence. The middle one." I tapped it twice with my index finger for extra emphasis, and she turned it over, revealing the ball. "Very good. Well, not really. That's the warm-up. The one you do to show the contestant that they have a chance. Now I'll speed it up a bit to see what you've got." Polly put the ball back under the middle shell and then began swapping at random with blazing speed. Sometimes she would move the shell to a different spot. Other times she would move it right back to where it was. Luckily, my years of gaming had trained my eyes well, and I spotted all of her feints and swaps with relative ease. So when the shell stopped and I pointed to the left one, I wasn't surprised to see the ball underneath. "Well done, lady. Most people usually can't follow me that quickly. I think it's time, though, for the real game to begin." The ball disappeared back under the left shell and off it went. The speed was even greater, and I felt myself losing the ball several times. It was then that I noticed the tell. To move the shell with the ball required just a little more energy, which Polly's hand betrayed ever so slightly. With that piece of intel, I stopped watching the shells and focused only on Polly's hands. But when I confidently tapped the rightmost shell at the end of the round, it was empty. "Ooh, so close. Care to go again?" I cursed under my breath. I was not going to let this little punk best me so easily. "Yes, let's do it." This time I had the benefit of my hidden edge the whole round, and again I felt sure that I had tapped the correct shell, only to come up empty-handed a second time. "Again," I said. Polly just smiled as the shells began their dance anew. Finally, after countless more rounds, I relented. "Enough, enough. You are something else." "Why, thank you, Jade," said Polly, with a smile dripping in condescension. "You were watching my hands, weren't you? That's smart, but it won't do you any good with these particular shells." "And why's that?" "Oh, come now. If I told you that, I'd have to kill you, now wouldn't I?" I stared at her as she made her pronouncement with a matter-of-fact tone. "Just kidding, geez. Can't you take a joke? Tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If you can win the next round, I'll not only show you how the shells work, but I'll double your tokens. If you lose, you get nothing. Plus, you'll owe me a favor. Do we have a deal?" I didn't give it a second thought. Done. 4. The Ties That Bind. Then the English sailed 4 ships into the harbor and took it from us. We crushed their navy in response, but let them keep the island anyway in exchange for some nutmeg trees halfway around the world. You tell me who got the better deal. I read too many stories growing up about naive would-be heroes who think they can outwit a demigod or a mischievous dwarf or some other creature, but only end up indebted and forced into their service. Even knowing that, I still agreed to Polly's terms. "Ooh, I like your style, Jade. Most people would at least ask what the favor is before agreeing, but you're bold. Anyway, here we go." I didn't think it was possible, but Polly's hands moved even faster this time, and I could barely keep up, as the shells whirled around and around. I tried looking at her hands and the shells at the same time to keep track, but it was no use, and I resigned myself to owing this little girl what was hopefully a minor favor, like pretending to be her older sister to get her out of school early. As the shells slowed, though, I noticed a new pattern in her hands. I could still see the extra exertion in one hand, but as the shells swapped places, so too did the tell. It was as if she was throwing the ball between shells, the receiving hand straining just a bit as the other hand relaxed. I watched the pattern repeat itself until finally Polly stopped and the shells were displayed in front of me to choose. "The middle one," I said. Polly's cheerful demeanor faded in an instant as she uncovered the shell to reveal the ball. "Well, I'll be darned! You won! I don't believe it!" I smiled. "Neither do I. Now pay up, please." Polly bent down to dig something out of her backpack and then set 2 iron tokens on the box. "Where are the other 2? "See, the thing is, I never expected you to win the double or nothing, and so I don't have the other 2. "Well, then I think that you are now in the position of owing me a favor." Polly frowned. "I don't give out favors willy-nilly, especially not for this small a debt. Come back here tomorrow and I'll have your tokens." "No, I don't think so. How about this? I'll forgive the debt, but after you show me how your little game works, I get to ask you one question and you have to answer it truthfully." We stared at each other while Polly considered my offer. Several times she opened her mouth as if she were about to say something, only to stop short. I was half expecting a lucrative offer to play the game again, but I think she was scared that I had actually deduced the secret. Finally, she sighed and started flipping over the shells. "The thing about you noobs, you're a noob, aren't you, is that you think this is all a game out of some Rumpelstiltskin fairy tale. Well, it's not. And ordinarily, there's no way I'd agree to answer your question, but I'm a Janssen, and we keep our word. Plus, I still can't believe you won, so I'll indulge you. Now watch closely." Polly tapped the 2 outer shells together, and then took the ball and dropped it in the left shell. She stood back with her hands in her pockets. I bent forward and looked into it, only to find nothing there. "Try the right one," said Polly. I looked in that one, and there was the ball. "But you didn't— How?" "Watch again." Polly took the ball out of the right shell, tapped the center and right shells together, and then put the ball back in the right shell. I peered into the right shell, and it was now empty. Instead, the middle one held the ball. "It's some sort of false bottom, right? You tap the shells together to open it?" Polly shook her head. "Any old person could do that, Jade. You should know better than—" "Oh, I see." "What?" "What level are you?" Um, uh, I didn't want to admit that the girl was right and that I was a noob. Nothing was more embarrassing than being that player who had no idea what they're doing and who stumbled around like a fool, playing the game so poorly that their own teammates try to off them so they didn't get in the way. But I knew so little as it was, and if I tried to pass myself off as someone more experienced, I was certain that Polly would not tell me anything at all. "So, I'm about to be level 2, once you give me the tokens? I've only been questing for a few weeks, though." Polly hit her forehead with her palm. "Unbelievable! Lost to a friggin' baby noob!" The girl shook her head, and a look of disgust formed on her face. "Look, I'm still going to show you how the trick actually works, but just tell me how you won. Tell me it was blind luck, and I'll sleep a little better tonight." I told her how I noticed the muscles in her hand flex and relax as the ball moved from one shell to the other, and she nodded, a slight smile on her face. "All right, I'm sorry I called you a noob. You clearly have some clue what you're doing, and next time I do this, I definitely need to wear gloves. And you're not entirely wrong about the false bottom, but there's only one ball. Here, hold these." Polly handed me the middle and right shells after fishing the ball out first. I looked inside them, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. "Tap them together." I did, and felt a tingling sensation in my hands, as if the shells were now connected with an invisible tether. Now here comes the important part. Polly flicked the ball into the middle shell with a graceful throw, and I caught it, only it never arrived at the bottom of the shell. Instead, I looked down into the right shell to see the ball rolling lazily around the bottom. Impossible. How? You couldn't have. I saw the ball go into the middle shell. I held the shells in my hand, the tension between them gone. Without asking first, I quickly tapped them together, and the tension returned, but just as quickly faded. "Look in the middle shell again." I did, and there was the ball. I tapped them together again, and the ball went to the other shell. To an outside observer, I must have looked like a crazy person, tapping shells together next to a middle schooler. "You done, or do you want to wear a hole in them? Those weren't cheap, you know." I handed the shells back to Polly, who put them back on the box. "I give up," I said. "How does it work?" "Well," said Polly, "not sure I should actually be telling you, given your level. I mean, the council came up with those for a reason. But a promise is a promise, I guess." She turned the shells on their side, so the insides faced me, and then tapped two of them together. The formerly opaque bottoms had changed somehow, a silvery circle in their place. "Promise you won't scream?" she asked me. I nodded quickly, not wanting to miss out on what she was about to show me. "Okay then, stick your finger in one all the way to the bottom." I stuck my index finger into the bottom of one shell, only to see it emerge from the other one several inches away. As if not believing what I was seeing, my brain told my finger to move, and the floating fingertip obliged. I broke my promise and screamed. 5. Level up. The English, in their stupidity, let us stay. We've been paying them back for that favor ever since. There are moments in my life that are so vivid, I only need to close my eyes and think briefly about them before all the details come flooding up to the surface. Me locked in the middle school bathroom, sobbing for hours. My mother's body draped in a sheet on the morgue table. There were others, too few of them happy. And now I would have to add this one to the list. The next thing I remembered was Polly grabbing my wrist and pulling it away from the shell, as if I was a child who had touched a hot stove. I brought my hand up to my face and wiggled my index finger to make sure that it was still attached. It was. But before I could dwell on the stunning development of the magic shells, Polly began pulling me down the street. What are you doing?" I yanked myself free, and we continued walking away from the corner. "What does it look like I'm doing? Getting us the hell out of there. You promised you wouldn't scream, remember?" "I did, but you could have warned me." We walked to a grocery store at the end of the block, and I followed Polly inside. Only when we had reached the middle of the cereal aisle did Polly finally stop and set down her bag, into which she tossed the shells. "I didn't think I needed to. It looked like you had figured it out on your own." "You said it yourself, though. I'm newer than a noob. How was I supposed to know that you somehow created a tiny rip in the fabric of the space-time continuum?" "The what?" "You know, a wormhole." Polly shook her head. "I don't know what the heck you're talking about. It's just some vervorium painted on the bottom of each shell." "Oh, of course, some vervorium painted on the shells." Her tone made it sound like she was describing how to make a sandwich. "I don't mean to sound like an idiot, but what is vervorium exactly?" "Vervorium, Jade, is a very rare but incredibly useful prima materia used to link two places together. It's hard to make, and you need a lot of ingredients, like the spleen of a freshly killed rat, for one." She did it again. "Prima materia, available in your local bodega next to a can of chili." "So that was you I was delivering the rat to?" Polly smirked. "Nope. This vervorium I stole or borrowed from my dad. Whoever wanted your rat was someone else, and not necessarily to make vervorium. Rats are very useful. We keep a ton in our garage." A clerk walked by with a cart full of cereal, and we headed in the opposite direction towards the freezer section. I tried to process these new revelations and wanted to ask a million more questions. Was this real magic? Or some incredibly complex science that had been concealed from the world by a select few? At some level, it didn't really matter. As one of my favorite authors, Arthur C. Clarke, had once opined, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Polly still owed me the answer to one question, so I racked my brain for one that would reveal the most information. All right, time for my question. We stopped in front of a case of frozen fish sticks. So the quests are just some cheap labor to fetch ingredients for your magic potions. Is that it? I had formulated my inquiry with just the right level of ridiculousness, in the hopes that Polly would relish the opportunity to disabuse me of my misconceptions by talking too much. But to my disappointment, she did not take the bait. "No," was all she replied. I waited for more, but she suddenly turned quiet and began drawing doodles on the freezer case. "That's it?" I said. "Look, I've already told you way too much for a level 1. Here's your iron. Good luck to you." She forced the tokens into my hand and then ran off before I could say anything more. For a second, I contemplated chasing her out of the store, but realized the optics of that were abysmal and would likely get me arrested. I kicked myself for asking too big of a question. There was clearly something greater going on here than just a bunch of random fetching. My fingertip floating in midair was proof of that, but all that I had to go on was a bunch of tokens, a crazy message board, and an even crazier story about a teleporting ball. With a sigh, I started to walk out of the store when something on the freezer case caught my attention. What I had thought were mere doodles were actually numbers. 6 numbers, in fact, separated in the middle by a period. It read 949.278. I stared at them, trying to figure out what they could mean, then kicked myself for not recognizing the sequence immediately. After all, I had spent every summer since I was 15 through college working in the Borough Park Library. I could hear my old boss, Ms. Bacadet's voice in the back of my mind, berating me for not remembering the Dewey Decimal Classification for 17th century Celtic literature, and I couldn't imagine how many months of stack duty she would have assigned me for my transgression just now. But thanks to those hours she spent hammering into my brain every single Dewey Decimal number, I was sure I could figure out at least part of this one without resorting to what Ms. Bacadet referred to as the idiot terminal. 900 was history, 940 was the history of Europe, 949 was the catch-all for the random parts of Europe that people didn't care too much about. But the 3 numbers after the decimal remained a mystery, as there was only so much information I could store in my brain. And having not worked at the library in 5 years, there was no reason to remember this stuff any longer. The 2 would be the country, but which one I had no clue. The 78 would be some other topic and time period as it related to this country, though again, I was stumped. I pulled out my phone to cheat, only to be bombarded with a flurry of Slack messages. Evidently, Russ's replacement, had picked up Russ's bad habit of fixing one bug by introducing 2 more. I quickly answered that I was on my way back from a doctor's appointment and ran out of the store, but not before snapping a picture of the cryptic numerals and then wiping the glass clean. It took me the rest of the afternoon and well into the evening to undo Ross's mishap, and between that and the haunting visage of my finger that appeared whenever I closed my eyes for more than a second, I had no motivation to tread back into the world of library numbering systems. But I still wanted to see if my level up had gone through, and so I clicked over to the quest board and logged in. I took out the 2-iron and set them in front of my keyboard, as if offering them to the questing gods. My profile screen loaded, and a big pop-up window appeared in front. "Congratulations, you've reached level 2, it said in fancy green script. I closed the window to check out my new stats. Quests completed, 12. Tokens earned, 23 wood, 4 iron. Level, 2. Token experience, 31. Level up, 100. 100 experience to get to level 3? What the heck? It had taken me 10 weeks just to get this far. I didn't want to count how many more rats I would have to bludgeon to get close to level 3. There had to be some way to take on more rewarding quests, or I would be stuck getting sneered at by the Pollys of the world for the next 3 years. But to do that, I would have to get smarter on the subject of questing. So the next day, on my way to work, I stopped at the Midtown Library to look up the mystery number. I wasn't sure how a book about the history of some random country was going to help, but I had a hunch that the decimal was chosen more for its obscurity than for its relevance to the subject matter. My theory was spot on, as a search of the library's digital holdings yielded nothing with that number. Not a good sign. But knowing how the library system worked, I was sure that their hard-copy card catalog was lurking around the building somewhere. After several annoyed librarians gave me conflicting answers, I finally found the 6-foot-tall structure in a poorly lit corner of the basement. The handwritten labels were brown and peeling, and of course the drawer I wanted was just out of my reach, so I located a rickety wooden chair, leaned it against the cabinet, and stepped up. It held. A cloud of dust sprayed my face upon opening the relevant drawer, and I began flicking through the cards. Finally, I reached 949.278 and was rewarded for my diligence. I pulled out the section number and the 2 cards that followed it, carefully stepped down from the chair, and took my prize over to a small table nestled between 2 stacks. Someone had written the name of the section on the first card in cursive, the blue ink of the letters scrunched together so that they barely took up any space. I studied the writing several times before I could make out what it said. The history of Dutch settlement in North America. That was not what I was expecting. I looked at the other 2 cards, hoping the book titles would shed some light on the relevance of what was turning into a wild goose chase. But instead of titles like I was expecting, there were only numbers. Fine, I thought. I'll just go back to the stupid computer upstairs and type in the numbers, and voila, books located. But the computer failed me again, bringing back nothing at all. Finally, I gave up and went to the reference desk. My run of luck continued as a woman who could have been Mrs. Becatet's twin was hammering away at her keyboard when I approached. I stood in front of her, remembering my training well. "Never interrupt a librarian mid-thought," Ms. Becatet had said. "She could be on the verge of locating a long-lost book that the next Nobel Prize winner needs to complete their masterwork." As much as I highly doubted that this scenario had ever occurred, I waited patiently until the clacking ceased. Excuse me?" The librarian turned and glared at me above the spectacles on her nose, as if it weren't her job to help people locate books. "Yes?" "I was wondering if you could help me locate these 2 books." I handed her the 2 cards. I searched the regular catalog but couldn't find anything. She snatched the cards out of my hand with the speed of a cobra. "Where did you get these?" They were in the card catalog in the basement." "And you just decided to rummage around in the meticulously organized card catalog that dozens of librarians spent years creating and maintaining?" Uh-oh. It was becoming apparent that I had unknowingly walked into a bear trap, and I needed to pull my foot free before this woman attacked me with the ferocity of a rabid dog. "Well, no, I just looked at these 2 cards, and I used to work at the Borough Park Library, so I know how important it—" "Oh, so you think because you used to work in a library, you can just waltz down to our card catalog and take out cards to your heart's content?" "No, but, look, I'll just put them back so they don't get lost." "You will do no such thing, young lady. I don't want you anywhere near my card catalog. The fact that— Look, are you going to help me or not?" The rudeness of my question knocked the wind out of Ms. Becatet's twin, and she just stared at me, unblinking, for several seconds. Then, in what I could only chalk up to a minor miracle, she relented and began searching for the numbers on the cards on her computer. I can see why these didn't come up for you. Someone must have transposed the book numbers incorrectly in the computer system. Fortunately for you, I've seen this before, or you would be out of luck. Ah, here we go. Oh. What happened? So, I found your books. It's just that I don't know where they are. That made not one lick of sense to me, but maybe it did in librarian speak. So they're lost? The librarian glared at me. We don't lose books. These 2 happen to be checked out at the moment, but by who and for how long, I don't know. It might have been a week or 2 or 12 years. Whoever loaned these books out did us both the disservice of not properly documenting those transactions. But I'll put you on the wait list, and when they do come back in, we'll let you know. Have a good day. Okay. Thank you very much. As much as I wanted to find out more about these missing books, I knew when I had overstayed my welcome and walked out of the library with even more questions and no answers. 6. Questaholics Anonymous. We kept to ourselves mostly, as the English never paid us much attention. Neither did the so-called Americans. Not that they knew the truth. If they did, maybe things would have turned out differently. Hi, my name is Steve, son of Steve, and I'm a questaholic. Hi, Steve. The voices echoed around the church basement, despite the small crowd seated in only one corner of the room. That other people had actually showed up quelled some of my remaining paranoia that I was the subject of a Harry Potter-obsessed lunatic's idea of an elaborate joke. But maybe everyone here was in on it too? That still wouldn't explain Polly's stupid shell, so I brushed such thoughts aside as I tried to listen to the confessional. Steve quickly launched into a sad and sordid tale about how he had broken his clavicle falling into the Gowanus Canal while collecting moss, and that after a couple of months of recuperating, he had finally attempted to complete the quest only to fall again into the canal. By the time he had gotten around to his 6th attempt at collecting the moss, I had largely tuned him out. Unlike the rest of the motley crew sitting in dingy chairs in the barely lit room, I had not come to achieve catharsis. No, this was an information-gathering mission. It had been several weeks since my visit to the library, and I still hadn't received any word on the mystery books. I had a sneaking suspicion that the friendly librarian had tossed my waitlist request into the garbage, and that I would never find out what Polly was trying to tell me. Then I caught a lucky break. I should have realized after the questing profile appeared randomly that there was more to the board than just the quests themselves, because now when I opened the main menu, there was a new option E, labeled Q Board. I hit E, and a new screen popped up. It was a rudimentary message board. The excitement bubbled inside me as I began scrolling through the posts. Here they were, the memoirs of the legendary heroine recounting her trials, tribulations, and defeat of the ancient evil that had ushered in this golden age of prosperity. Or the quest equivalent of spam. Awesome. Even membership in a secret underground magic world did little to slake humanity's innate compulsion to spam everyone else, apparently. But at least I was a member of the club. And given the lack of a missed connection section on the quest board, this spam was all I had to dive deeper. After checking to see that no one was looking over my shoulder, I printed out each post, stuffed the papers into my purse, and ran down to the treehouse. No, it was not one of our conference rooms. Ours were all named after Final Fantasy characters, but rather the woman's bathroom, my preferred place for silent reflection. As the rest of the engineers were arguing about some nitpick in last night's episode of Arrow, no one noticed as I scurried past them into the treehouse and locked the door. Finally alone, I pulled the papers out of my purse and set them down on the marble counter to study. There were token banks, where scrupulous individuals would watch over your tokens for free, and probably loan them out to seedy goblins played by Warwick Davis. Advertisements for how-to pamphlets, where to find the most frequent quest-requested items, creative excuses for work absences, and more, and then some of the posts had printed out completely blank as far as I could tell. It was all very exciting, but where to start? As much as I wanted to check out the token bank, they would probably laugh me out of the room for bringing my meager hoard. I was also convinced that it was merely a cover for robbing gullible idiots, and my lack of money also made the how-to pamphlets cost-prohibitive. I was about to stuff everything back in my purse when I noticed the last piece of paper, which I thought had been blank. Ignoring your spouse to dumpster dive for trash behind the 7-Eleven at 3 in the morning? skipping work meetings to meet quest scalpers outside Madison Square Garden, stealing half-eaten ice cream cones for kids because you think they're worth a couple of wood. These aren't the signs of healthy questing. No, they may be the symptoms of a questaholic. But you're not alone. We've been there, and we can help. We're Questaholics Anonymous. Next meeting on Thursday at 700 East 3rd Street, Grace Church basement. It was the perfect opportunity for an undercover operation because, after all, I had few tokens to my name, but a lifetime of sob stories to really inject some desperation into my fake descent into questaholism. I tucked the papers back in my purse and perused the quest board on my phone for quests I could pretend to have failed. Outside, I could hear the engineers hypothesizing what the title of Star Wars Episode 9 should be, but inside the treehouse, all was peaceful. The other questaholics drank in Steve's story, nodding at his misfortune while pretending to listen. I surveyed them as a sociologist would. Compared to the rest of the group, Steve could pass for normal. Some were disheveled, a cocktail of odors emanating from their bodies and mixing together to form an even more horrid stench. Some stared off into space as if they were observing a parallel reality. One woman wore an empty baby carrier across her front and would from time to time pat the head of the not-there baby. I didn't have to try hard to imagine how far she had fallen off the wagon. I soon realized that my rehearsed tale of woe was not going to be sufficient. These people were far more broken and screwed up than I was going to pretend to be, or actually was. If I was going to avoid the fate of a size 0 showing up at an Overeaters Anonymous meeting, I needed to kick it up a notch. Luckily, I ended up being last in the circle, so when it came to my turn, I had my story ready. Hi, my name is Jade, and I'm a questaholic. Hi, Jade. I stopped at the Park Slope Farmers Market on my way home from work to pick up an empty lobster tail shell. Digging through piles of discarded shellfish, I found the perfect one. Or so I thought. As I exited into the alley next to the seafood stand, a shortcut I had found during a previous questing foray, I was beset upon by a band of teenagers who circled around me with menace in their eyes. I was about to reach into my pocket to offer them my wallet when a smile appeared on one of their faces. Keep your filthy norm money. It's your tokens we're after. I was never one to carry my tokens on me, but I knew that wasn't going to be a satisfactory answer, so I stalled for time. This lobster tail shell is worth 5 wooden tokens if you throw it in the sewer grate on the corner of Baltic and Bond. That's all I have. I held out the shell with trepidation. The leader of the group walked toward me with a smile and took the offering. As he turned to walk away, I breathed a sigh of relief, but in that moment I let my guard down, and thus didn't hear his compatriot sneak up behind me. As I looked down, a gleaming serrated blade held audience with my throat, its edges just a thin gap of air away from spilling my blood. It was then that the first ruffian turned back towards me, a glint of metal reflecting from his knuckle. I stood there, paralyzed, as he punched me in the gut 3 times. The knife wielder withdrew and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Still smiling, my attacker, barely more than a boy, bent down until he was squatting in front of me. No one comes questing near the market without our assistance. If I see you snooping around here without any tokens on you, the hurt you're experiencing now will feel like a summer breeze compared to next time. You follow? I nodded slowly, which satisfied him and the rest of the group. By the time I got to my feet, they were gone. I looked around the circle, waiting to see the group's reaction. Finally, a woman in her 60s with graying brown hair smacked her fist into her palm. The council's got to put a stop to these attacks before someone gets hurt. I'll bring a petition to the next meeting that we can all sign. Most of the other people nodded in agreement as I breathed a sigh of relief, but then a troubling thought bubbled up in my brain. This manufactured gang might not have been as fake as I had thought, and that made my heart beat a little faster. Is there some sort of map charting out the safe spaces where we won't be attacked or robbed? I asked. If I was actually going to be set upon by marauding teens, I might as well know where the no-go zones were. The brown-haired woman's brow furrowed for a second at the question. Can't say that there is, but it would be a good idea to pool our findings. Let me talk to some of the other meeting groups, and maybe we can't just get something whipped up. The meeting finished soon after, and I made my exit quickly after grabbing a powdered donut, lest anyone hit me up for more information about the non-existent gang. I was nearly up the stairs to street level before Steve caught up to me. Interesting story back there, he said with a hint of mockery in his voice. If I didn't know better, I'd say you just carved yourself a nice little slice of territory where no one else is going to intrude. My eyes widened. I hadn't even thought of that. I was just trying to sound troubled. I don't know what you're talking. Save it, newbie. I'm not going to rat you out, Ms. Concerned Citizen down here, but next time, try to come up with something that doesn't sound like it was taken from a bad 80s movie that you watched on cable last night. We reached the top of the stairs, and Steve started walking away. Wait, I cried. This guy obviously knew a lot, and I would be stupid not to try to milk him for whatever information he would tell me. Steve stopped and turned around, and I jogged over to him. Look, I'm only a level 2, and honestly, I just want to know more about what the hell this whole thing is. An iron for your story? I'll throw in the first drink, too. I held out the token in my palm and stood there in silence while he considered my offer. I only had 4 iron, but this seemed like a good use of the tokens. Plus, I really had no idea at this point what else I would spend them on. Finally, Steve shook his head and pushed my hand away. Keep your tokens. Don't need them. But, he said, giving me a look up and down with a creepy smile that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, I do need a drink and some company after the day I've had. On second thought, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. Did he think I was hitting on him in a weird, roundabout way or something? Gross. But then that stupid shell flashed in my mind again. I had to know more, even if it meant enduring the stares of this creepazoid for a few hours. 7. Tales from the Cantina. When the war broke out, we didn't want to get involved. The guild had played both sides for so long, why take a risk now? After the 3rd subway transfer, I was beginning to suspect that letting Steve pick the bar had not been a good idea. When we finally walked down from the train platform at Ditmars Boulevard in Astoria, it had taken the better part of the evening, and despite the long trip, Steve had barely said a word to me. Where exactly are we going? I said, finally breaking the silence. Steve ignored me, and we continued weaving through the crowded sidewalk, passing one bar after the other. He abruptly turned off the main drag onto a side street, where he quickened his pace. I followed, but my danger radar was about to reach its boiling point. Thankfully, we had finally reached our destination, a 3-story brick building with a boarded-up storefront. Someone had tagged the boards with black spray paint, and the second-floor windows were all dark. So much for a night out at a trendy cocktail lounge. Look, I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong idea, but there's no way I'm stepping foot in your apartment. Why don't we just go back to one of the 15 bars we already walked by? Steve ignored me and hit a buzzer next to the door, which after a few seconds swung open on its own accord. You coming or not? He asked. Not waiting for my response, he walked into the building. I could have walked away, then. It would only have cost me a wasted evening. But against my better judgment, I ran to the door before it swung shut. The interior opened almost immediately into a set of stairs dimly lit by rusty light fixtures that lined the walls, and Steve was already close to the top landing. I caught up to him and saw that there was someone else there, a woman who looked to be in her 70s, sitting on a metal folding chair. She would not have looked out of place at the Questaholics Anonymous meeting, her gray hair bushy and unwashed, a pair of reading glasses dangling from a chain around her neck. If she and Steve knew each other, they didn't acknowledge it. Steve pressed onward through a red door at the end of a short hallway, and I followed, the woman paying no mind to me either. I hoped they weren't paying her a lot to be the bouncer, because she was doing a terrible job. The red door swung backward after Steve went through, and I paused to let it rebound before pushing it back. If what waited for me on the other side was some sort of torture dungeon, at least I would be able to quickly escape. But all of my trepidation vanished as I stepped foot into a crowded, noisy bar. I blinked, waiting for the illusion to vanish, but it didn't. In contrast to the woman outside, all of the people here looked, dare I say, normal. The bar itself was in the center of the room, a huge square manned by 4 bartenders who were efficiently serving up drinks to the dozens of patrons on all sides. A balcony ringed the room above, with tables spaced around a metal railing. If I hadn't just spent the last 90 minutes trekking across the city to a random, abandoned-looking building, I would have thought it was indistinguishable from the bars I frequented in my post-college, finally on our own in the big city days. Steve walked past the bar to a small spiral staircase that led up to the balcony. The upper level was quieter, the crowd from downstairs evidently not preferring the intimate tables. We sat down at one of them, and the long journey finally was over. I waved over a waitress so I could fulfill my promise to buy the first round, only to realize that I had no idea if I even had enough tokens to cover one drink. Steve, I know I said I would get the first round, but, how many tokens does a drink usually cost? Steve snickered.
Where do you think we are? Some secret quester bar?
He shook his head.
This is just a regular bar pretending to be a Prohibition-era speakeasy. Only difference is the extra $2 a drink for the ambiance.
The waitress arrived, and we gave her our order. Now that I knew we were no place special, I held my quest talk until she had dropped off the drinks a few minutes later. Oh, but if this is just some random bar, then why did you make me trek all the way out here?
Been meaning to try this place and wasn't sure they would let me in without a pretty face.
He grinned, and I shuddered internally. Did he think that was a compliment?
So, Jade, why were you at the meeting? I thought I was the only one who'd like to feel better about myself by listening to those sob stories.
Wait, so you didn't break your clavicle trying to get some moss?
Of course not. It just sounds so pathetic, and to be honest, most people don't know what a clavicle is, which means I don't have to show up to the meeting in a fake cast.
Oh. This guy was turning into a real scumbag, but I tried not to let my disgust show. Got it. So you just quest as a hobby, or? Steve took a sip of his drink, put the glass back down, and then began stirring the tiny little straw in a clockwise rotation.
Something like that. Let's just say that my father, also a Steve if you hadn't figured that out from my handle, was so wildly successful in certain pursuits that we wouldn't have to quest for several generations, even if we spent our tokens like a bunch of drunken sailors in a whorehouse.
This conversation was leaving me more and more confused by the minute. Unless there was a whole underground economy run on tokens, what was the point of stockpiling these things when we were living in the real world and needed real money to pay for our real-world needs, like food and shelter, for instance? Right, I said, as if I knew what I was talking about. I wish I didn't have to quest, but my parents wanted nothing to do with me after high school, so now I'm starting from square one. The lie was believable. Or so I thought. I had already given away too much, I realized, when I asked Steve for help, but I thought that he might tell me more if he thought I was one of them, a member of the questing fraternity, rather than some random person who opened an email one night.
That's a shame, he said. I couldn't imagine if my kid had to work her way up from the bottom. Not that a little hard work wouldn't do her some good, mind you, but I'll bet it's been tough out there since they opened the floodgates.
What do you mean?
You must have noticed. Or maybe you hadn't because you're so new, but it didn't used to be like this.
Like what?
Quests done for a couple of wood. Not to sound like an old man, but when I was a kid, there weren't any wood tokens. They started at iron. And a quester wouldn't walk out the door for less than 20 iron, and that was for something basic. Now that the council has brought in so much riffraff, the bottom fell out, and you can source pretty much anything for a few wood.
Steve paused to finish his drink in one long sip, and then flagged down the waitress for a second old-fashioned, which she brought over quickly. It was always a good sign when someone got so agitated that they felt like drinking more. It meant that I was on the right track, and just needed to keep needling. But people aren't just going to keep questing for wood, right? I mean, what good are they if they're not even worth so much experience?
Experience? Another recent invention by the council. They thought that making the whole thing like a game, peeling things back level by level, would help them find what they are looking for. But no, all it's gotten them is that motley crew in the church basement. A bunch of people who couldn't find the philosopher's stone if it was lying on the ground in front of them.
So I wasn't so far off in thinking this whole thing was a huge manipulation of everyone's dopamine triggers. I would have found the whole thing diabolical if I wasn't so impressed with the execution. So what is the council looking for? I asked. I didn't know who or what the council was, but it seemed like the next logical question. Steve took a big swig of his second drink and then perused the drink specials placard on our table until the waitress walked by.
2 grogs, please, he told her,
which, according to the menu, was a drink that contained one or more of the following: rum, cider, beerhead, pineapple whiskey, lemon juice, water, cinnamon, and red dye number 2. It sounded disgustingly sweet, the kind of drink that would give you a hangover before the night was over.
What are they looking for? That's easy. New blood.
The grogs arrived in big glass mugs with intricately decorated handles. I had barely touched my scotch, as I wanted to maintain my facilities during this conversation, so I hoped that the grog wasn't too strong. The bartender must have put in copious amounts of red dye number 2, which I thought was a joke, because the liquid was a shimmering red.
Cheers,
said Steve as he raised his mug towards me. I clinked mine in response, and we both took a sip of the grog. Imagine the most foul concoction of spirits, beer, and wine, and then multiply that by 30, and you still wouldn't be halfway to how bad this tasted. For all the simpleness of the ingredients, it felt like the liquid was going to burn a hole in my esophagus if it didn't eat through the glass first. New blood. For what, though? Ugh. To go on epic quests?
Epic quests, ha! Just the council trying to be creative. You know how many lifetimes it would take to get 185 gold tokens? I've never even met someone who had 1. No, the council's goal is much simpler.
Somehow Steve had already drunk the entire mug of grog and was eyeing mine lustily. I wanted to pour the whole thing into his glass, but we weren't close enough for that yet. I also wanted him to get to the point of this conversation before I lost it. It was like he was taking long sips on purpose to avoid getting to the climax. What? I asked.
To find more magic.
8. Sufficiently advanced technology. But war makes strange bedfellows, and too many of our number threw in with the British, so the rest had no choice but to help the new Americans. I'm sorry, what? Steve hiccuped, his cheeks alcohol red.
Surely your parents showed you... Bleh.
The sound and the smell of the loud burp made me cringe. I looked around to see if anyone was paying attention to us, but thankfully we remained safely anonymous.
Excuse me. Phew. The grog is strong tonight, am I right? That needed to come out. Anyway, what was I saying?
Steve pulled something out of his pocket and popped it in his mouth. As he chewed, his demeanor began to change almost instantaneously, the drunken sloppiness of the previous few minutes fading to the background and his cheeks returning to their normal color. You were saying that the council was bringing in new blood to find more magic. What magic?
Oh, right. You know about magic, yeah? Real magic? Not wave your wand and say a stupid word magic?
No, I didn't, but please continue.
Sort of. My parents weren't exactly the talkative type. Oh. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything then. But how awful of your own family to keep you in the dark like that. I mean, I told my daughter the truth when she turned 6. Although if I had known how that was going to turn out, maybe I would have waited.
Your daughter wouldn't by chance be an 11-year-old girl with blonde pigtails named Polly, would she? Steve's face lit up with excitement, and I instantly regretted making this connection.
Yes, that's her. How do you know her? Is she mentoring you or something? I told her that she should be helping people instead of trying to scam everyone. The little scoundrel. What a small world. I mean, it's not like there are thousands of questers in the city, but still.
Ah, crap. I had just broken open the dam of this whole secret world, and now we were going to get sidetracked into a discussion on how great little old Polly was. If Steve only knew how she had raided his stash of Vervorium, then he might not be so eager to sing her praises. Which gave me an idea. No, nothing like that. I did a quest for her a few weeks back. She wanted to test out a new game she was working on. Cute kid, but I stopped and reluctantly took a swig of the grog, causing me to shiver involuntarily as the liquid cascaded down my throat.
But what? What did she do this time?
I don't want to get her in trouble or anything. I mean, she paid me what she said she would, but no, I shouldn't.
Yes, you should. You've already said enough to get her in trouble, so you might as well tell me so I know how serious this is.
Okay, fine, I'll tell you. But you go first. Something about real magic?
Oh, right. So, magic. Maybe that's a bad word for it. It's not something you're born with or can learn by practicing. That's just some fairy tale that Hollywood cooked up to sell movie tickets. No, magic is something that's literally a part of the earth. Think of it as this big source of power that's running through the entire planet, like a river. It's in everything. It can become part of anything. It's the most valuable natural resource in history, and most of the world doesn't even know it exists.
I stared at Steve, not knowing what to say, my pulse quickening and my stomach churning. Like the day I got that call from the detective about my mom. I wanted to throw up. What insanity had I gotten myself into? What? I don't understand, I stuttered. So you're saying that there's literally magic coming out of the ground?
Well, yes. And no. The days of pure magic spouting from the earth like a fountain are long, long gone, if those days ever existed in the first place.
Oh, but I'm so confused. I mean, I've seen some things, but I thought maybe...
That you were losing your mind?
Yes.
You're not. This is why you're not supposed to know the truth until level 25. By then, you would have completed enough quests to realize there was more going on than people asking random strangers to do weird errands.
Right. Well, I appreciate the truth, I guess.
So the items people are fetching on the quests have magic in them, yes. Not much, mind you. Like any natural resource, magic is not infinite. It can be used up, hence the current predicament. We can't rely on the old sources anymore. We've had to be resourceful to figure out new wells to draw from, some of which are inconvenient and messy.
Like the spleen of a rat. Steve nodded.
Yes, exactly. Picture all of the different places a rat goes, the different things a rat eats. It's a collector of sorts, of germs and disease, but also trace amounts of magic.
Wouldn't that mean that there was magic in people, too?
Probably. But the amount that could be pulled from a person is not worth the price of admission, if you know what I'm saying. Far easier to kill a rat, or even a pigeon.
I didn't know whether to feel excitement at this incredible discovery, or absolute horror. If magic was real, marvelous, and amazing, that meant that other things could be real, too. Like ancient evil monsters sleeping within the Earth's crust, waiting for the appointed day to rise up and lay waste to humanity in an ocean of blood. It made my heart race even faster.
I can tell by your silence that I've probably already told you too much. It's a lot to process, I'm sure. That's why those that know try to tell their kids early enough so it's something they think of as part of their everyday world. Your folks did you a real disservice by hiding it from you.
Seems like it. But to be honest, this whole thing sounds like a far-fetched fairy tale from a guy who's had too much to drink. I don't mean to be rude, but you're, 4 drinks in? Steve smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out something small in a bright green wrapper, which he put on the table.
You're right about the number of drinks, but wrong about everything else. Finish your grog and your scotch and then take this, and you'll see what I mean.
That sounded like a terrible idea. Get extremely drunk and then pop a who knows what from a complete stranger. Yet the next thing I knew, my mug and glass were empty, and my hands were fussing with the mystery object on the table. The sudden influx of alcohol had already hampered my fine motor skills, and so it took almost a minute for me to unwind the green wrapping, which revealed an even brighter orange square gummy. I popped it in my mouth and began to chew. Contrary to its outward appearance, the gummy tasted like a rotting piece of fish with the consistency of an uncut cherry tomato. Fortunately, it was small enough that the disgusting taste soon faded, and I waited for something to happen. I began to feel lightheaded, the 2 drinks I had imbibed in successive fashion no doubt working their destructive force inside my liver, and I felt my already churned stomach getting ready to release its content back up my throat.
Can you excuse me for...
Steve shook his head.
Just give it a second.
My head began to spin, and I gripped the table, expecting the worst. But then, like a flick of a switch, my sober mind was back and my stomach calm. I sat back down. What just happened? Steve smiled.
Just a little concoction I whipped up using some basic alchemy. Nothing too fancy. Here, take another for your next night out.
He slid another green-wrapped gummy across the table, and I pocketed it. That was something else. How did you make that? What else can those gummies do? What are the ingredients? Do you need any special equipment? What's alchemy?
Seems like it's causing a weird side effect on you. It'll probably go away in a few minutes, but pretty impressive, right?
It was impressive. Something like that could be worth millions, if not billions of dollars. But at the same time, it seemed so mundane. What Polly had shown me was something I couldn't have thought possible.
Anyway, what was it that you didn't want to tell me about Polly?
Oh, that. Well, the thing is, she borrowed a bit of your vervorium, whatever that is. Not a lot, according to her. Just enough to create a portal between 2 shells for a 3-card Monty scam. It was actually quite clever. I screamed so loud when I put my finger in. The grog mug came down on the table and shattered into a dozen pieces. I looked at Steve, whose forehead now sported several popping veins.
I'm sorry, I need to go. Thanks for the drink.
He tossed some crumpled-up dollars on the table and headed down the stairs. I dug a similar handful of money out of my purse, hoped it was enough, and ran after him. Steve had stopped at the bar, where he had pulled out another wad of cash and placed it on the counter.
Sorry about the mess.
The bartender looked at him quizzically, but Steve didn't stay to explain as he continued to the door, down the stairs, and out onto the street. "Why are you in such a hurry?" I yelled at him. He stopped and turned back to me, and I made up the distance.
Because my daughter is in more trouble than I realized. Now, good night.
He started off again, but I wasn't ready to let him go. "I know about the books. Polly told me," I said. Technically, that was true. I did know about them, just not what they were or where they were.
She did?
Yes. I didn't say more, hoping he would spill some more secrets.
Bullshit. My daughter may be many things, but she's not stupid enough to give away the compendium to someone like you.
The compendium. The word dripped with mystery and lore. Now that I knew its name, I had to redouble my efforts to find it. She didn't give it away. It was a fair trade. I won her little game, and she gave me the call number for the compendium.
But a lot of good that did me. Someone else checked it out of the library first. Steve chuckled. The compendium isn't in any library. No, I'm afraid my daughter was playing another trick on you. Wouldn't be the first time. She has a bad habit of messing with noobs. Then what damned if I know? Listen, I really need to get home. Try to stay out of trouble, especially the alleyway behind Trader Joe's in Union Square. That's the Black Vulture's domain, and you don't want to mess with them. Okay. And why is that? Steve pulled up the bottom of his sweater, revealing a jagged scar that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly green glow. The vomit that should have come earlier finally rose in my throat, and as I stooped over to finish retching, I could hear Steve laughing as he retreated into the distance. 9. Girls' Night Out. I was one of the last holdouts. Most of the men in power were spoken for, and it is hard to predict, even for me, who will be pivotal and who will be pitiful. But I eventually found someone suitable.
I cannot wait to try this food. Lisa, you have to taste this dip. It will change your life.
Ooh, looks yummy. Pass it over here, Stace.
Wait a sec. Just need to get a pic for Insta first. Okay, one sec. Hashtag cheat day. Hashtag oh my god, so good. Hashtag girls night out. Hashtag besties. With at Lisa Tees and at JJax42. Okay, posted. Here you go.
Thanks, Stace. Wow, that is good. Try mine. Wait, let me get a snap. On and on this went for the entire first course. Next time, I should remember not to agree to go to a tapas place until the world runs out of rare earth metals and we don't have any smartphones left. My own food sat uneaten in front of me, not because I was trying to match Lisa and Stacy's social media whoring, but because I hadn't been able to keep anything down since yesterday's fateful evening with Steve. It should have been a momentous occasion. The discovery that the world wasn't what it seemed, that there was something greater lurking underneath the veneer of everyday life. But no, Steve had to leave me with that final parting gift. The jerk hadn't even bothered to see if I was okay after the vomiting subsided. When I finally regained strength enough to stand, he was gone and I was alone. In fact, I had probably never felt more alone. And that was saying something. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling in my bedroom, afraid to fall asleep lest that green glow trap me in a never-waking nightmare. Why couldn't he have let me enjoy the discovery of the truth for even a few hours, without revealing the darker, horrific side of magic? I dragged myself to the office, exhausted, and spent the day trying to forget what I had learned and what I had seen. It didn't work, no matter how many lines of code my eyes scanned through. I think I fell asleep in the treehouse for at least an hour at some point, which was good, I guess. But back at my desk, the quest board was calling to me. My mind had shifted into grief mode, a familiar setting, to process this new reality, and I had already moved past denial and anger to bargaining. What if I just played it safe? I asked myself. I won't go milling about in dark alleys late at night, I declared. You can't get stabbed with a mystical knife if you don't hang around in an area where the knife wielders are likely to be. It was just another version of being street smart. My mind continued warring with itself the rest of the day, one side never gaining enough will to either command my hand to click over to the quest board or delete the bookmark forever. When the texts from Stacy and Lisa began pouring in about our dinner, I broke the stalemate and rushed out the door to meet them. This was what I needed, a night of distraction. Even if I couldn't tell them what was going on, just being with other people was enough for the moment, despite them probably ignoring me for most of the evening. JJ, have you lost weight? You look great, cooed Lisa. I hated that nickname. It's not like my last name was long or unusual. It's Jacobs. How much more nondescript could you get? And yes, I had lost weight, thank you very much, all in the last 20 hours. I wish I had never met Steve. Oh, maybe just a little. Trying to eat smaller portions, I said sheepishly. Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. Anyway, Stace, you should have seen the look on Brad's face when he saw this month's credit card bill. I swear. I tuned out Lisa's latest wedding planning squabbling while moving the spoonful of orzo around on my plate. It had only been 4 months since their engagement, but it felt like that movie The 5-Year Engagement. What with the number of dress fittings, celebration drinks, celebration brunches, and other assorted celebrations that Lisa had concocted. For some reason, news of these outings always managed to trickle my way at the last minute. But I learned long ago that as the member of the trio with the least social capital, I should just be thankful that they were still even friends with me. JJ, what do you think of my new haircut? I'm trying something out for the wedding. I looked at Lisa's hair, which looked indistinguishable from its normal look, but I knew better than to say that, so I studied her perfectly coiffed do for a few more seconds before answering. It looks cute, I said, with as much enthusiasm as I could muster. No! Lisa pushed away the rice balls she was eating in disgust. I told the hairdresser I wanted to look hot, not cute. Ugh! I have half a mind to storm down to that salon right now and demand a refund. I swear, if they're going to charge $650 for a cut, they damn well better. I ignored Lisa as she launched into a cavalcade of explicit and violent things she was going to do to her hairdresser, who, based on my 3-word review, had done terrible, life-shattering damage to both Lisa's hair and psyche. I sighed. These were my friends. Not just my friends, my 2 best friends, my 2 only friends. Shoot me, please. I only had myself to blame. Most people would jettison a bunch of self-centered, vapid friends at the first opportunity, but not me. You know how sometimes the first people you meet freshman year of college end up being the ones that stick around the rest of your life? Yeah, well, I had the unfortunate privilege of running into these 2 during my first 20 minutes in Ann Arbor. They had ambushed me by my dorm room as I was fumbling with all of my luggage.
Hi, I'm Stacy, and this is Lisa.
I had looked them over warily. They looked like they belonged to the popular set. Hair and makeup perfect, even though they had just spent hours unpacking, just in case someone important or cute walked by. I, meanwhile, looked like I had just woken up after a 9-hour bus ride. Hi, I'm Jen. Jen Jacobs.
Nice to meet you, JJ, Lisa said. Can I call you JJ? You look like a JJ.
Sure, I guess. My mom used to call me Jay.
Perfect, then it's settled. JJ, you're coming with us. We spotted some cute boys hanging out in the lounge upstairs.
I relished these girls at first. Really, I had no one else in my life then except an aunt I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and some neighbors who made sure I wasn't getting into any trouble those last few months before I left for college. And they were nice to me, at least at first. They let me borrow their clothes, taught me about boys, and tried to be the older sisters I didn't have. I perversely felt a sense of superiority whenever the 3 of us were strolling through campus. Over time, though, the compliments turned backhanded. The slights started mounting, and my standing in the group began to decline. But I held on as much as I could. What other choice did I have? There was no one else. I felt a buzz in my pants pocket. I pulled out my phone and nearly dropped it on the floor. The quest board had somehow opened on my phone and was displaying blinding, blinking pink text. Time for a new quest, it said. I put my phone back in my pocket, my hand trembling. What was happening? It was like the board knew what I had learned and was determined to wrap its tentacles around me and not let go. My mind wandered back to the internal battle I had been putting off earlier. It was a bad habit I had accidentally picked up during a meditation class in college. Instead of focusing on my breathing, I inevitably created an intense visualization about something that was giving me anxiety. And this time, it was no different. It was single combat, the old normal me versus the new magic me. The normal me was dressed in a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, and I held a wooden staff and shield for some reason. The magic me was dressed as a Valkyrie, with a shining metal helm and an axe at my side. It was not the bloodbath I was expecting. Normal Jen wielded the staff with discipline and efficiency. Valkyrie Jen was the opposite, erratic and emotional. She swung her axe with too much force time and again, allowing Normal Jen to step to the side. This went on for several rounds, until a wicked grin appeared on Valkyrie Jen's face, and she suddenly lurched forward and struck the ground in front of Normal Jen with the axe. The earth sundered, a crack forming under Normal Jen's feet. As the ground split apart, Normal Jen tried to jump to one side, but slipped and fell, her fingers digging into the dirt atop the deepening chasm. Valkyrie Jen walked over to the edge, surveyed her opponent for a few seconds, and then, without warning, sliced the girl's hands clean off, sending Normal Jen tumbling into the depths. Back at the table, a small smile began to form on my lips. This was the last time I was going to sit with these two and feel sorry for myself, I thought. I was destined for greater things than being the third wheel to two vapid women. I took my phone out of my pocket again and looked down. My hand twitched, the burst of confidence expended. The blinking message was still there, and I quickly tapped it with one finger, bringing up a single quest. Please bring 5 3/4-eaten portions of food to 1690 Bleecker Street in the next 20 minutes. But it can't be your food. Tricky, I know. Also, a stolen lipstick. Reward, 2 iron tokens. I stared at the quest, which seemed to have been written by the guy sitting at the booth behind me. If I hadn't just been put through the ringer by Steve and his stupid scar, I would have been totally weirded out and refused to take it. But what would have bothered me yesterday morning wouldn't even register today in my new reality. Now that I knew at least some of the truth about the quests, the requested items didn't seem like they were destined for some intricate magical concoction. No, if I had to guess, the requester was hungry and had some spare tokens lying around. Iron being fairly worthless, it was like getting food and lipstick for free. So, of course, I accepted the quest without giving it another thought. Ugh, this sucks, I said, still staring at my phone. What happened? Asked Lisa. My boss just emailed me. Some new investors are coming in tomorrow and he needs some more hand-holding on the new code we just finished up. I gotta run. I'm sorry, girls. I pushed my plate away and began inching out of the booth. Oh, that stinks, JJ. Let's have them wrap up some stuff for you to go. I'm done eating anyway. Don't want to add any more inches to my figure since I already had my last fitting. Excuse me? Lisa snapped her fingers at a passing waitress as I exited the booth, knocking over Stacy's purse accidentally in the process, the contents spewing all over the floor. Shoot, my bad, Stace. Let me clean that up for you. I got down on my knees and began scooping up the fallen items, pocketing a neon red shade of lipstick for myself. I grabbed the food from the waitress and raced out of the restaurant. 10 minutes later, the items were safely deposited on the stoop of a seemingly abandoned townhouse, and I was enjoying a leisurely evening stroll back to my apartment. My mind wandered back to the aftermath of the battle. Valkyrie Jen stood alone at the edge of the chasm before walking a few paces to pick up the wooden shield that Normal Jen had been holding. She stared at the depictions on the front, and I observed them too. There was me, staring at a computer screen, my eyes bloodshot. Me waiting for Duncan to FaceTime from Hong Kong. Me trying to pay attention at dinner tonight. Valkyrie Jen shook her head and let out a loud guffaw. Then, with a flourish, she tossed the shield into the air, grabbed her axe from her side with the other hand, and, with a perfectly timed swing, obliterated the shield as it began falling to the ground. Despite the earlier violence that I had witnessed, this display of wanton destruction raised a little seed of doubt within me. Had I made the right choice? As if sensing the growing moral quandary, the pieces of the shield on the ground began shaking as if they were trying to put themselves back together. Valkyrie Jen, however, was having none of it. She snapped her fingers, and a column of flame erupted around the broken shield. The flames vanished, and when the smoke dissipated, all that was left was a pile of ash. Satisfied with her destruction, Valkyrie Jen then turned her gaze skyward, as if she could see me, as if I was a goddess watching her creation from above. The proud warrior grinned at the sky, clapped the dust off her hands, and walked away. The scene dissolved into a hazy mist, and when I reoriented to my surroundings, I found myself in front of my apartment. A grin had formed on my face, the same grin worn by the Valkyrie. In the end, I didn't need the battle to convince me which path was the right one. Why? Because for all my fear and doubt, it was really a simple choice between the drudgery and loneliness of my prior life and the chance to be part of something fantastical and extraordinary. What other choice did I have? 10. Farhampton. As far as husbands went, and I've had too many to count, Henry was one of the better ones. The pie crust turned a golden brown as I watched anxiously through the oven window. I waited a few more minutes, and then, mitts in hand, I removed the pie and set it on the windowsill in the kitchen, the cool autumn air drafting in through a crack. Quest complete. Well, almost. Just needed to drop this baby off under a bench in town, and the tokens would be mine. No, really. It was early Saturday afternoon, and the house was quiet. Duncan was upstairs sleeping, having landed early this morning from Hong Kong and needing to get rested for his boss's party tonight. We had rented a small house for the weekend in Northampton, a very old East End hamlet with a very new name. Evidently, an enterprising real estate agent had started advertising his listings as being located in the then non-existent town of Northampton to foreign buyers looking to stash their cash in the U.S., and suddenly prices began skyrocketing, trendy shops began filling the downtown strip, and the town council was considering multiple petitions to change the town's name. Fortunately, the new 8-figure homes that had popped up hadn't yet fully pushed out the quaint cottages that dotted the town's winding roads. It had only made their owners jack up the weekend rental price. But Duncan didn't flinch at the cost, his most recent bonus plentiful enough to absorb the hit. Speaking of, the man had still not made his way downstairs, which gave me time to make another pie. I cut up the apples I had picked earlier into slices, poured the sugary filling into the crust, and laid the top over the whole thing. I slid it into the oven and pulled up the details of the quest. 1 apple pie made with Mutsu apples picked from the 17th row of trees at Running Brook Orchard. Reward, 7 iron. I wasn't planning on questing this weekend, as I needed a break from, well, everything. The last 4 months had been an unrelenting grind. If not for the mandatory 3-day wait between quests, I would have tried to do one every single day. Even with the gaps, I still managed to rake in 40 wood and 16 iron for a grand total of 72 experience, leaving me just a hair over level 3. The day I reached that milestone should have been a happy one, but Duncan had been away and I hadn't felt like drinking by myself. Again. So I splurged on a spa day and tried to forget that to get to level 4 at my current rate would take at least 8 months. If the council, whoever they were, wanted some new blood, this incessant grinding was not the way to go about it. And I hadn't had any luck tracking down the mystery library books either. Several visits to branches in all 5 boroughs had yielded nothing. Hours of online searching had been fruitless, and if I set foot in another used bookstore, I was going to shoot myself. So it was a nice surprise when I woke up to an email from Duncan the other day that not only would he be coming home a few days early, we were going away for the weekend to boot. A whole weekend with Duncan was a rare occurrence, and I wanted to be present rather than thinking about alchemy, prima materia, and the scar. Unfortunately, my curiosity and boredom got the best of me after 5 minutes, as I really had nothing else to do when I got to the house yesterday evening. I had innocently pulled up the quest board to see if there was anyone out here who had taken the red pill. Turned out that the East End was not a questing hotbed, with only a smattering of rinky-dink fetch quests offering a few iron at most. I wouldn't get out of bed for less than 6 iron, so 7 iron was right on the line. But the opportunity to take in the fresh fall air at a scenic farm was enough of an incentive for me, so I accepted. The orchard was practically empty when I arrived, and I paid the ridiculous $40 for the right to fill a bag with more apples than I would be able to eat in a month, and set off for the designated row. The few orchard employees out among the trees eyed me suspiciously. I suspected that they were used to seeing happy couples arm in arm, or parents swinging their kids in the air as they meandered about. The pathetic sight of a girl picking apples by herself at 8:45 in the morning couldn't be countered by an argument that the apples tasted better, or there was something satisfying about foraging for your own food. But I didn't need to justify my presence. I just needed to find the fracking trees so I could go make my pies. Yes, pies, plural. If this wasn't yet another errand for someone, then there was something different about these apples, and I was damn sure going to figure out what that was, which was easy enough. I would just make a second pie, take a bite, and see what happened. I walked down the path that ran through the center of the rows of trees until I reached a very threatening piece of yellow tape that was strung across the gap at the 17th row. I looked around to see if anyone was nearby, and seeing no one, I stepped leisurely over the tape and into the forbidden section. I knew something was wrong immediately when my right foot sunk into the soil down to my ankle as soon as it hit the ground. My left foot remained planted on the other side, and I stood there, straddling the tape, trying to reclaim my foot and my freedom. But the soil had turned rock hard, almost as if it was cement. I struggled without success for a minute or two, all the while looking back to see if anyone had noticed my predicament. Luckily, I remained undetected, but unluckily for my favorite hiking boots, I quickly determined that the only way to wrest myself free was to leave my right boot trapped in the dirt. I gave the trapped boot a good pull just in case the dirt had decided to play nice, but it wouldn't budge, and I reluctantly parted ways with it and walked away from the yellow tape. The ground was slightly damp from recent rains, and my right sock soon was covered in dirt. I contemplated wrapping the empty apple bag around my foot and trudging back to the front of the orchard, but the sight of stray apples in the dirt gave me an idea. I backtracked one row and took a hard left away from the center path. The trees in the 17th row abutted their siblings in the 16th row, the only difference being there was no yellow tape separating the two. Apples littered the ground at the base of the trees. I stopped at a random spot and pushed my way in as far as I could manage. The corresponding tree in the 17th row was still a bit out of reach, but luckily its fallen apples weren't. Careful not to step too close to the weird soil, I began collecting the mutsu until I had a decently full bag and then retreated to safety. I looked down at my spoils. The apples were green, like regular green apples. I put the bag down and removed one of the apples. It weighed what you would expect an apple to weigh. No magic golden apples here. I brought it up to my mouth, held it there for a few seconds, and then took a small bite. Nothing happened. I swallowed and took another bite, swirling the apple pieces around in my mouth like a sip of wine. Still nothing. Maybe it was one of those slow-acting apples. You know the ones where you take a bite, go to sleep, and then don't wake up for 100 years? Well, if that was the case, the damage was already done. Or maybe the apples needed to be heated for the effects to kick in, hence the request for a pie. In any event, my facilities remained unimpaired, so I figured I might as well get the hell out of Dodge before I was discovered. I put the half-eaten apple back in my bag, stopped at a row of trees with yellow apples to cover over the mutsu, and trudged off back to the rental car. It was late enough in the morning now that the throngs of apple pickers had begun to arrive, and so none of the staff noticed the one-booted girl slip by with a bag of potentially magic apples. When I arrived back at the house, I laid out my haul on the counter. 14 mutsu apples, enough for 2 pies with a few left over. I set to work, nibbling on the extras as I went, all the while hoping that whatever magic they held would kick in eventually. If necessary, I was prepared to eat the whole pie, stomach consequences be damned, to figure out what was so special about these apples. I imagined the answers neatly laid out in the compendium, hidden on a shelf somewhere in the city. There would be pages of maps showing the location of flora and fauna that had magical properties, tables of recipes and experiments on how to mix disparate ingredients to make something new, a whole chapter on the uses of rats. The pages would be brown and make a satisfying crinkly noise as you turned them. I imagined that each family had a copy that had been passed down from generation to generation, each successive one scribbling notes in the margin with new ideas and new things they'd tried. Without the compendium, though, I would need to figure everything out for myself, one quest at a time. The first pie would be for the quest, and the second one for me. And Duncan, if he ever woke up. Just a few more minutes, and I would be able to find out if these apples were worth losing my boot over. The creak of the old wooden stairs betrayed Duncan's descent into the kitchen. He wore a tattered t-shirt and sweats. The back of his hair was sticking up, and I'm sure he hadn't brushed his teeth yet. But I didn't care. It had been so long that I almost had forgotten what it was like to have someone else in my life. Duncan surveyed the scene in the kitchen with a quizzical look. "One day in the country, and you've gone domestic on me."
"And hello to you, too. I didn't think you were going to wake up in time for the party." Duncan walked over to me and gave me a kiss. It was short. More than a peck, but less than a haven't-seen-your-long-time girlfriend in 3 weeks type of kiss. He pulled back slightly, and I wondered if he was waiting for me to press forward, as if testing me to see if I would continue the kiss, to see if I had missed him more than he had missed me. But then suddenly his hands were around my waist, his lips back against mine, his fingers trying to untie the apron. Our lips never parted as we made our way up to the bedroom, and the distance that had separated us was gone. We lay together in bed afterward, the sheets and blankets strewn about haphazardly, my head resting on his shoulder, his arm around me. For the first time in a while, I felt content and calm, as if the world outside the room didn't exist, as if the quests were just a bizarre daydream I had created. I closed my eyes and pretended that this could last as long as I didn't open them. But the kitchen smoke detector had other plans. 11. An apple pie from scratch. Over the years, my methods have evolved as my talents have waxed and waned. For the foreseeable future, I will have to rely on my marriage, my pen, and my ink. Duncan raced out of the room, still naked, and scampered down the stairs. I threw on half of my clothes quickly, grabbed some of Duncan's, and followed. The kitchen was full of smoke billowing from the oven when I entered, and the sight of him wearing nothing but oven mitts trying to fish a pie out of the oven was too much, so I let out a chuckle. Duncan looked up, his face red from either the heat or anger, and stopped what he was doing.
"It's not funny, Jen. You could have burned down the whole house."
"Oh, please, it's just a bit of smoke. Plus, the window's open, so it mostly went outside already." I plopped his clothes on the counter and shooed him away from the oven to survey the damage. My spare pie was burnt to a crisp, the upper crust charred a deep black and rock hard. Crap. I looked over at my remaining apples on the counter. Just 2. Not enough for another pie, and damned if I was going to go back to that orchard again. I found a fork in one of the drawers and poked the top of the pie with it. It did not give way. I kept poking until finally a chunk of the crust sunk into the apple filling below.
Jen, what are you doing? Duncan had managed to put on his underwear and t-shirt, and so looked a little less ridiculous than before, but he was clearly annoyed that I had ruined the second round of hooking up that he was likely hoping for.
Trying to see if any part of this pie is salvageable. It took me a long time to make. I managed to break away more of the crust so that I could retrieve a good-sized bite of the center. The extra heat didn't seem to have affected the interior of the pie, which was odd, and I brought the filling up to my nose. It smelled normal, so I took the plunge and stuck the whole thing in my mouth. The urge to vomit began almost immediately as I swallowed the last bit. I dropped the fork and raced out of the kitchen to the nearest bathroom. Squatting over the open toilet, I began dry-heaving involuntarily and waited for the bile to rise in my throat. But then, just as quick as it had come, the compulsion faded. When I returned to the kitchen, Duncan was seconds away from cutting into the first pie. "What are you doing?" I said, almost screaming.
"Having some pie. What does it look like?"
I was so confused as to why you even tried the burnt one when you had a perfectly good— "Don't eat that, please," was all I could say before snatching the pie away from Duncan's grasp.
"What do you mean? Why else did you make it if we weren't going to eat it?"
Duncan looked at me like I was a crazy person, and he was only half wrong, unfortunately. Because, well, this was not the moment I planned on revealing my secret. I mean, what a dumb way for him to find out, right? I would have rather been caught drinking some arcane concoction, or walking out of the bar with Steve, or even looking at the quest board on my computer. But to give it all away for the sake of a stupid pie was absolutely ridiculous. At the same time, though, I wanted those tokens, and I didn't care what Duncan thought. Because I was baking it for your boss's party tonight. The expression on Duncan's face held steady for a few seconds before finally settling back to normal.
"Oh, okay. Why didn't you say so?"
"Sorry, it's just, I worked really hard on this. I picked the apples myself this morning and everything."
"It's fine. But there are, farms everywhere here. You could have just bought a pie instead of going through all this trouble."
"I know, but sometimes it's good to get your hands dirty." Duncan smiled and put his arm around me.
"Say, since we were so rudely interrupted before, why don't we—"
Without warning, Duncan lifted me onto the counter and began pulling up my shirt while kissing my neck. "Baby, oh, that tickles. I told your boss's wife that I'd drop the pie off soon, though. You know how she gets." Duncan halted his advance, my shirt already up to my neck. I pulled it back down and slid off the counter.
"Okay, I guess. But you owe me a rain check, Jellybean."
"It's a date." I gave him a peck on the cheek and ran upstairs to get my clothes. Alone in the bedroom, I realized that my lie had now spawned several subsidiary lies, such as why the pie wouldn't be on the dessert table later. Fortunately, Duncan was never one for remembering every little thing, and in a few hours he'd be so jet-lagged and drunk that he would forget all about the pie. But one step at a time. I parked a few spots down from the bench and waited in my car for several minutes on the off chance the requester was still nearby. No one appeared, and, anxious to get back to the house, I walked over to the bench and sat down. I had placed the pie inside several layers of plastic bags, which were tied into a tangled knot. I hoped it was enough protection from the elements, and so I leaned forward and slid the pie underneath the bench. Evidently, the requester was very trusting, as the tokens were already waiting in an envelope taped under the bench. I ripped the envelope free and tore it open. 7 iron tokens. Not that I cared so much about the tokens themselves. With the whole level ladder revealed to be a fraud by Steve, it didn't matter how slowly I was progressing through the ranks. Besides, I already knew more than someone at level 25, and my aim at this point was knowledge, not these worthless tokens. I sat there, still hoping the requester would show him or herself, but after several minutes it seemed like a lost cause.
So I decamped for the car and began the slow, winding drive back to the house. As I meandered by horse farms and neatly planted fields, I speculated on what should have happened when I had tasted the pie. In Warriors of Olympus, there were magic fruit you could find while exploring. Some restored your health, another cured you if you had been poisoned, and still others bestowed some temporary benefit, like being able to run quicker for a few minutes. Any of those would be earth-shattering revelations, if real. But the cheap reward for the quest made me suspect that the effect was more mundane than that. I mean, if the orchard was hiding apples that could bring someone back from the dead, the reward should have been a lot more than 7 iron. My mind considered the opposite proposition. What if the apples were that amazing, but setting the reward further up the token spectrum would have drawn attention to their value, and everyone would have just tried to take the apples for themselves? Ugh, this was making my head hurt. I tried to stop the guessing game, but my brain had already leaped to the next possibility. The apples were only deadly if you baked them into a pie. And by eating said pie, I had unwittingly poisoned myself and would soon die a horrible death. Thankfully, I reached the house before I could dream up any more awful pie scenarios. What's done was done, I supposed. So I shifted my anxiety to surviving the night's festivities. I hope you'll at least try to talk to someone tonight. It was dark, and we were lost in the woods. The roads twisted and turned as our car lurched forward. I didn't know if it was the jet lag or if he had already forgotten the afternoon's activities, but Duncan was in a foul mood, and, as usual, taking it out on me. But of course, Professor Higgins, your etiquette lessons have been most helpful.
I'm ever so excited for this party.
Duncan rolled his eyes. I think we made a wrong turn. Did you come this way earlier? From what I had Google-stalked, Duncan's boss's house was something to behold. 12 bedrooms, 2 pools, a private dock. If only I actually had brought the pie over earlier, I might have convinced someone to give me a tour.
Maybe? I'm not sure. The GPS was working earlier, and it wasn't dark.
After a few more silent minutes, the woods melted away, and we were driving between 8-foot-tall, perfectly manicured hedges. Finally, rows of taillights appeared, and we pulled up in the enormous gravel driveway to wait our turn to valet. Look, there are going to be some important investors here. Just shake hands and smile and don't make me look bad. I resented the implication that I was a bore from the wrong side of the tracks who couldn't be trusted to have a normal conversation with another human being. But one bad night at one of Duncan's work dinners had evidently given Duncan the impression that I was always on the brink of embarrassing him. Tonight I would comply and be the perfect little New England boarding school Ivy League alumna that he thought he should be dating. But we would definitely be having a talk about this later. We walked up the steps to an immense wooden door, which opened into a huge foyer with marble floors and twin staircases leading up to a landing. Duncan's boss, Jeff, and his wife, Plastic Surgery Face, not her real name, were greeting people in the middle of the room. Duncan! Recovered from last night's festivities? Hey, Jeff. Yeah, the usual Dramamine Hong Kong overnight flight combo. Plus, I took another nap this morning at the house we rented. Good. And hello there, Jen. Good to see you. Sorry for keeping your boyfriend away all the time, but he says you're working round the clock anyway. Hopefully so you can make us all some money soon? Great. 5 seconds into the party and I was already forced to bite my tongue. Yes, thanks to the generous investment by the Jeff Fund, we would make it to the end of the year. But in the process, all of my stock options had been so diluted that at our current valuation, I would maybe net minimum wage this year, while Jeff would make out like a bandit. And Duncan would get nothing because of the conflict. A win-win-win. Good to see you too, Jeff. Yeah, we've been slammed reworking the engine. It's been really tough. Marcus, my man! The next sycophant walked in behind us, which gave me the perfect excuse to slip away. Besides, Duncan and I both knew that I was a deadweight in these conversations. I would show my face a few times, laugh at someone's jokes, and my duties for the night would be satisfied. So I excused myself to use the facilities and walked away. The foyer led into a gigantic kitchen, with dozens of waiters milling about waiting for appetizers to come out of the various ovens. I maneuvered around them to the open glass doors at the back that led out onto the deck. The cool fall air was kept at bay by tall heat lamps placed every few feet. I found a spot at an empty cocktail table, flagged down a waiter for a drink, and waited to see if Duncan would eventually find me. He didn't. So I spent the next half hour people-watching and admiring the view out onto the bay. It was quite breathtaking. But I could only stare out at the water for so long, and despite our earlier conversation, it would look bad if I kept my distance from Duncan the whole night. The kitchen was even more packed than before, a new set of people already laying out dessert on a giant table. I barely managed to squeeze past it when something on the table caught my eye. My pie. 12. The Fruit of Good and Evil. My letters have been intercepted, and the results have been as expected. Henry and General Washington continue to be astounded at Howe's inexplicable refusal to finish off the Continental Army. It makes me smile. I stared at the pie way too long to convince myself that it wasn't mine, but there was no mistaking the small impressions that my fingers had left on the crust that were now baked into the finished product. "Can I help you with something?" One of the waitresses was setting down a big tray of apples next to my pie. Her jacket was covered in some kind of dust, her blonde hair was frazzled, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. No, was just admiring the dessert selection." "Yeah, it is something else. Well, we'll be bringing it out to the patio a bit later, so thanks." I walked out of the kitchen reluctantly and went to find Duncan. He hadn't even made it out of the foyer, where he was talking to a group of people whom I didn't recognize. "There you are, Jen. I was wondering where you had run off to. This is Tad, one of the LPs of our newest fund, and his wife Julia." "Nice to meet you." I proceeded to nod along as Tad recounted in great detail their summer in the south of France. Eventually, the waiters appeared with little plates of petit fours, so I knew it was time to go pie hunting. The bigger desserts had been arranged in a buffet out on the deck, and by the time I got to the pie, it was already half gone. I grabbed 2 slices and went to find Duncan. "Here, Dunk, some of my delicious homemade pie." Duncan looked at me quizzically. "Oh, right, I almost forgot you brought that over. An odd choice by Jeff to have the dessert be potluck, but he's always looking for weird ways to save money." "Yeah, strange. Well, cheers." We clinked our forks together and each took a bite. The filling was soft and warm and actually tasted good. If this programming gig didn't work out, maybe I had a second career as a hipster baker. I took a second bite of just the crust and froze. It tasted like streusel. Streusel that wasn't on the pie when I left it under the bench earlier. I resisted the urge to spit everything back onto the plate and slowly chewed the crust, the chomping of my teeth amplified with every movement of my jaw up and down. Finally, the bite was gone, but my heart was racing. What the heck was going on here? That's when the voices started. This is good pie. I hope Julia didn't see me talking to Abby." It actually worked. I clutched my ears and nearly fell over. The light din of conversation in the foyer had suddenly exploded into a cacophony of voices. If I concentrated hard enough, I could pick out the individual strands, if only for a moment. "Time for another drink. This house is so pedestrian. Next party, I need to have Barbara pick out something for Jen to wear. It's embarrassing." That last voice I recognized. I stared up at Duncan, who was chowing down on the rest of the pie slice, seemingly unaffected by the voices and oblivious to the fact that he had just insulted me. Dunk, what do you think of my dress? Lisa lent it to me. A lie. This dress had been in my closet since college. It was a miracle it still fit. Duncan nearly spit out the pie, which sparked a coughing fit that continued for over a minute. Whoa, sorry, wrong pipe. Your dress? It looks great, babe. You look good in anything. I glared at him, not sure whether to accept the compliment or call him on the... What are you doing? A woman's voice cut through the others, and I looked around the room to see who was yelling at me. I said, what are you doing? The voice hit me again a second time, and I nearly fell to the ground. A chair was set nearby, and I staggered over to it and sat down. Jen, what's wrong? Probably had too much to drink. She's always been a lightweight. Duncan's words and thoughts hit me back to back, but I didn't want to deal with him right now. I just wanted the voices to go away. Just a bit of a headache. I'll catch up to you in a bit. He nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and everyone else's, apparently. Don't ignore me. I asked you a question. Who, me? I said out loud. Yes, you. But you don't need to shout. I can hear you even if you don't speak. Oh, I thought. What do you mean? What am I doing? I'm being bombarded with the thoughts of half the people at this party. Yes, I know. And you almost ruined a perfectly good experiment. Sorry? The sensation of talking with someone in my mind was incredibly disorienting, and stop that. You know I can hear what you're thinking, right? I just didn't think you would be able to hear me back. That has made things interesting. Glad I could help. I'm not sure I would go that far, but you've piqued my curiosity, so I'll let this go a little more before I get rid of you. Crap. I knew I shouldn't have eaten some of the apples. Wait, could she hear this? I needed to come up with a plan before— Too late. I heard it. I told you, it's like you're shouting in my ears from a foot away. So you're Jade Phoenix 42. Kind of a dumb handle if you ask me. But I guess a small thanks is in order, though, for baking such a delicious pie. And for solving the mystery of why you can hear everyone, too. That would have been I shut my eyes tightly and blocked out the rest of the voices. Instead of trying to block my tormentor's thoughts, too, I would channel them into a place where I was in control, my anti-meditation skills finally proving their usefulness. I imagined myself in a bare room with no doors. Without warning, a big sheet of glass appeared on one wall that looked out into another room. I could vaguely see the contents of that room and the formless shadow of my tormentor, who was perched at the glass trying to listen. If my thoughts were loud, my voice would carry through the glass and she could hear me. But if I whispered, then she was cut off, and my thoughts were still my own. Excellent. Now to figure out how to get rid of this woman. So I asked what I thought she would think was a stupid question. Because of the apples? When I ate them earlier, nothing happened. I saw the shadow of the figure behind the glass move, but then the figure disappeared and a new image appeared on the glass. It was the fuzzy outline of someone walking through Running Brook Orchard. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, and I forced myself not to think about it further. Of course not. Did you let your boyfriend over there have some? No. Right. Then there would have been nothing for you to hear. The apples create the link that allows thoughts to travel from one mind to the other. The mention of the apples again triggered another scene to start playing on the screen, but it wasn't like watching a movie. I was reliving a memory through her eyes. It was the orchard, except this time at night. I watched for a few seconds as she walked down the familiar rows of trees before the memory flickered off again. Oh, that makes sense. Like the Vervorium linking places. Yes, exactly. Now, if you don't mind, I need to get going and you— Wait, but then what about the pie? Do I need to lay everything out for you like a kindergartner? When you baked the pie, you degraded the apples so that the linkage between minds only went in one direction, like a one-way mirror. At least that was my theory before tonight, and now that I've proven it, now I got it. But hold on a second, there was streusel on the pie that I didn't put there. Was that part of it too? Don't be stupid. Your pie just looked so bland, so I needed to make it more appetizing. Anyway, I'm glad we cleared this whole thing up, and I really do need to get on with mind wiping and all, but why didn't you just go get the apples yourself? The memory resumed, and this time I could feel what Beatrice was feeling, too. I didn't know if that was her name, but I needed to call her something other than that woman or the mind reader, and it was the first thing that came to mind. I felt the thrill of sneaking into the orchard at night, felt that thrill turn to terror as her feet submerged into the same soil that my foot had been trapped in, felt that terror turn to fear and desperation as she struggled to free herself. Well, because you so helpfully agreed to get them for me for 7 iron. What an asinine question. Quit stalling so I get not buying it. If I knew about these apples and what they did, there's no way I would let some random person know that there was something different about them. You'd be surprised at how desperate some people are for tokens. They don't ask questions and are just happy to have the chance to get no. I think that you would have gotten them yourself, but you were afraid of going back to the orchard. The memory flickered off, but it gave me an idea. It was a wisp of a thought, a puff of smoke, there and gone in an instant. I couldn't risk Beatrice hearing it and ruining the plan before I could execute. What? Don't be ridiculous. It's an apple orchard, not a torture chamber. You know, you are starting. In my mind, I ran over to the glass wall and started shouting as loud and fast as I could. You got stuck, just like I did. Well, probably worse. You went at night and no one found you until the next morning. I can just imagine the state you were in when they dug your feet out of the ground. And as I recounted what I had just seen back to Beatrice, I felt the same feelings resurface in her mind, and the linkage between us began to weaken, the joined rooms becoming fuzzy. You were cold and tired. Your pants were soiled, and then, for good measure, they dropped you on the dirt and gave you a few nice whacks in the stomach. Then they stood you up, walked you out of the orchard, and tossed you onto the road. Guessing they banned you for life. Not that you could ever go back. The trauma— Stop it! The force of her voice pushed me out of the room in my mind, and nearly out of the actual chair I was sitting on in the real world. I straightened myself up and tried to refocus on the room, only for the voice to— You know, I was going to go easy on you. Just push you to drink a little too much so by tomorrow you wouldn't be sure if this was real or not. But now you've really pissed me off. The room snapped back into focus, except this time, instead of the glass divider, there was an old wooden door between my mind and her mind. As the knob began to jiggle slowly, I retreated to the back of my room. Oh, have I? The way I see it, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if it wasn't for me. I tried to keep up my confident front, but I could feel the fierceness of her anger increasing like a shark that smelled blood. Not a great way to repay someone who helped you out now, is it? You got paid what you agreed to, she yelled through the door. It began to open, but the wood was warped, and Beatrice had trouble pushing all the way through. Maybe so, but had I known when I agreed to your quest what I was really fetching, well, nothing. I found the apples. You're just a pair of hands, a pair that has overstayed its welcome. So if you don't mind, I think you'll be going now. The door flung open, and I saw her for the first time. Except it wasn't the first time, I realized. I had thought Beatrice was likely the snooty wife of one of Jeff's investors, but this made much more sense. The perfect way to infiltrate a party full of rich people with lots of secrets to be purloined. Because no one ever pays attention to the help. The avatar Beatrice presented in my mind was different than the frazzled waitress I had seen in the kitchen. The dusty jacket was replaced with a long black gown, her blonde hair was long and stick-straight, and there were no bags under her piercing green eyes. She stared at me, cowering at the back of this room I'd constructed, and smiled. "Nowhere to run, Jade," she said, as she slowly walked the length of the room toward me. She was right. I had nowhere to run. My back was against the wall, and the only thing separating me from her was time. Wait. That was the answer. If I couldn't run away, then I would make her keep running to me. Because after all, this whole room was of a construction of my own making. It could be as long as I wanted it to be. As the thought finished, the room exploded, and I felt myself being flung backward. When the dust settled, I was still against the same wall, except instead I was now at the end of a very long hallway. "Neat trick," Beatrice yelled from the other end. "But I'm going to catch up to you eventually, So all that you've done is postponed the inevitable.
Beatrice trudged down the hallway in her heels, but that gave me precious moments to think of how to stop her. With the orchard memory used up, I didn't have any of her own pain left to use against her. That was okay, though, because I had plenty of my own to spare.
"Can I tell you a story?" I shouted. "It won't take long. I'll be done by the time you reach me. I was having a drink with a dear friend the other day, and he was telling me about how he got into a right nasty scuffle with a bunch of street toughs and things got ugly. One of them had a knife, you see, and not one of your everyday run-of-the-mill knives that just stabs someone and makes all the blood come out. No, this knife was different." "Enough."
She was getting closer, maybe only 10 feet away.
"Get out of this house now, or..."
It left a mark on its victim that just wouldn't go away. And then my friend, who loves a good joke, pulled up his shirt and... I pulled up the bottom of my dress while calling up the image of Steve's green scar. It was as horrifying as I had remembered it, and I felt a shudder ripple through my body. I looked down and there was the scar, crisscrossing my stomach like a lightning bolt, its otherworldly glow casting the hallway with an eerie light. I looked up to see Beatrice only a foot in front of me, and the last thing I remember before the floor dissolved underneath us was the small purple stone around her neck, shimmering softly as we fell into a black abyss. 13. Mind Reader. General Washington continues to evade Howe, but for how long I do not know. Winter approaches, and I am running low on ink. I opened my eyes. The party was still in full swing around me, as if no time had passed. I squinted at the harsh light of the real world, and I felt beads of sweat dripping down my forehead. Whether the people around me were actually talking out loud or if I was still hearing their thoughts, I wasn't sure, and I felt a growing urge to vomit for the second time that day. Suddenly, one of the waiters ran past me toward the kitchen. I took that as a sign that Beatrice had caused some sort of commotion, and I staggered off to the front door. Luckily, the valet stand was not crowded, and I was soon winding my way back through the dark country roads. I was halfway back to the house when I was sure the voices had stopped, which was about 10 minutes before I realized I left Duncan at the party with no car. I had bigger problems to deal with now, though. I finally pulled into the unlit driveway of the rental and found my phone flooded with dozens of texts from Duncan, who had been scouring the party looking for me. "Sorry, Dunk. Felt sick, so needed to get out of there," I texted him. "Also, you're a dick for thinking that I can't dress myself." "You could have told me," he wrote back. "I know, but I didn't want you to feel obligated to leave." "It's fine. Some stupid waitress knocked into Clarice and she smacked her face against the marble counter. Blood everywhere. Jeff took her to the hospital." "Oh, wow. Is she okay?" "Not sure. Might need another nose job." "Ha ha. Wasn't trying to be funny." "Oh. I need to stay until Jeff gets back." "Okay." I got out of the car and walked to the front door. The night was quiet and starless, the only sound coming from the crunching of my heels on the gravel walkway. It was a marked change from earlier, when the combined chatter of the partygoers' thoughts had threatened to overwhelm my sanity. I sat down on the stoop and stared out into the darkness, letting the silence wash over me and clear my head, but my thoughts kept drifting back to those stupid apples. That's when I remembered I still had 2 in the kitchen. I headed inside to the kitchen counter where I had left them. I picked them both up and weighed them in my hands, as if they now were the golden apples of Eris. What were they truly capable of? And what else was out there, lurking in plain sight? I put them in the freezer, climbed the rickety stairs, and collapsed on the bed. I woke up to an empty bed and a text from Duncan that he had stayed over at Jeff's and was getting a ride back with him to the city. Whatever. He would be on his way back to Hong Kong tomorrow, and by the time he came back, last night would be ancient history. Well, nothing to do now but pack up and head back home myself. It was a long, lonely ride west, and I spent most of the time trying not to replay my encounter with Beatrice. Looking back, it was a miracle I had escaped from her clutches unscathed. If she was actually capable of controlling my mind, there's no telling what she would have made me do.
As I sat in traffic approaching the Midtown Tunnel, I felt like I was trapped on a small boat in the middle of a rushing river with only a worn wooden paddle to navigate, while Steve and Polly and Beatrice and everyone else passed me by on fancy yachts or huge clipper ships. The wake from their boats made my pathetic dinghy rock from side to side. I tried to steady myself with the stupid paddle, but it was so useless I chucked it in the river and just gave myself to the whims of the river. After what seemed like hours, I finally reached home to find the door to my apartment slightly ajar and the noise from the TV filtering out into the hallway. That wasn't anything out of the ordinary, as my roommate had a bad habit of leaving the door open with her keys still in the lock. "Marnie, you left the door open again," I called out as I entered the apartment. She didn't respond. Great, I thought. I just went through a hellish weekend only to come home and find out we've been robbed. Or worse, Beatrice had tracked me down and was waiting for me on the couch watching Real Housewives. A quick search of the apartment revealed nothing other than my roommate's stupidity, so I retreated to my room, shut the door, and pulled out my laptop. Before I realized what I was doing, the familiar whizzing of the quest list appeared on my screen. I began scrolling through the text, looking for promising leads, discarding quests that were too easy or too cheap, and was about to accept one to fetch some cot leaves when I stopped myself. What the hell was I doing? Any one of these quests could deliver me right into the arms of another psychopath, or the same psychopath. I couldn't stay away, though. I had taken the red pill, and I needed to keep going down the rabbit hole to see where it went. The ping of my regular inbox interrupted my moral quandary, and I clicked over to see who was bothering me. An email from the New York Public Library was waiting for me with the subject "Book on Hold Available." My eyes widened. Had someone finally returned one of the mystery books? I put all thoughts of questing on hold and ran out the door to find out. It was unexpectedly pouring when I exited the subway, and I sprinted the last few blocks to avoid getting drenched. After waiting behind an old man trying to return a DVD for 20 minutes, it was finally my turn at the circulation desk. A familiar visage greeted me as I stepped forward, the librarian from my first visit. She looked at me with unknowing eyes and quickly walked to a room in the back after wordlessly looking up my hold on the computer, returning a few minutes later with a large book wrapped in a plastic dust jacket. "Here you go. Due in 2 weeks. Next!" I grabbed the book and scurried away before she changed her mind, retreating to a carrel in the basement to inspect my prize. The outside was hardened leather and had no discernible title. The bottom of the spine had a small piece of paper taped under the dust jacket, the call number that matched the one Polly had written out on the freezer case so many months ago. I opened the cover to the first page. The texture of the paper was coarse, and the weight of the page substantial. 3 words and a number were written in dark green ink. Rita Von Ash, 1777. The pages that followed were similarly handwritten in the same dark green ink. Some of the ink had faded. Other pages were incomplete, either with pieces torn out or with the writing stopping halfway down the page. I read the beginning few lines of a couple of random pages, which seemed to recount the history of the settlement of New Amsterdam/New York, although not one that I had ever read. I flipped to the last page, which sported an entry dated December 31st, 1777, and read the first few lines. Finally arrived at Valley Forge with some of the other officers' wives. British Army retreated back to Philadelphia. According to Henry, we will be camped here for the better part of the winter. The area has good natural defenses, and my survey yesterday indicated the presence of several promising sources. Hid compendium in the usual place before I left, which is unfortunate, but troops will provide plentiful supply of testing subjects. Any resulting deaths can be blamed on starvation. I closed the book. The account was cold, methodical, and it made my head spin. This woman, whoever she was, sounded like a sociopath, like someone who would throw away lives as if they were lab rats. In short, she sounded like a certain person with a penchant for apple pie. I shuddered and turned the last page over to see if there was another entry on the opposite side, only to be greeted with an envelope taped to the inside back cover. An envelope with one word written on it. Jen. I felt my insides turn to jelly as I traced my finger across my name. What the heck was going on? Maybe Polly had had the book this whole time and was waiting to see if I was worthy enough to receive it. That made sense. If I were her, I wouldn't have trusted this book to me either. I ripped the envelope from the book and carefully opened it to find a piece of paper folded in 3. Unfurling it revealed a short handwritten note with something taped to the bottom. Jen. Yes, I know your name isn't Jade. That's what happens when you join minds with someone. Things are bound to leak through that you didn't expect. It's how you probably know my name, too. It's also how I knew you were looking for this book. Consider it a gesture of goodwill on my part. Because I have great plans for you, Jen. You see, I've reached an inflection point in my questing progression. I've come a long way since I fetched that 90-10 beef, Tillandsia, apple popsicle, and the handful of blueberries all those years ago. But I need help to keep climbing the mountain, to take on the guild. And after searching for a long time, I think I've found the person who's going to help get me there. See you soon, Beatrice. My eyes drifted to the bottom of the letter where the writing continued in a darker black ink. P.S. Put this ring on. A simple silver ring was taped to the letter just below the words, which suddenly began echoing in my head in Beatrice's voice. They got louder and louder and louder until my own thoughts were suffocating under their weight, and the only thing I could do was comply. And I watched as my left hand ripped the ring from the paper and placed it on my right index finger. Beatrice's voice immediately faded into the back of my mind until my own thoughts resurfaced, and I stared at the ring now adorning my finger. The initials RVA were inscribed along the band. Horrified, I grabbed the ring with my left hand and began to pull, only to hear Beatrice's voice rise again in my mind, commanding me to put on the ring. I stopped pulling, and the voice subsided. 3 additional attempts yielded the same result. Just then, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a new text message from a number I didn't recognize. You can't take it off, Jen, so don't try. See you soon. Love, B. What had I done?